Before we get into this episode of Black Ops, we want to thank this video's sponsor, Conflict of Nations World War III. Conflict of Nations is a free-to-play online strategy game where you lead a real country through World War III. You can choose to forge alliances with other nations or expand your territory through brute force. You'll command armies of tanks, jets, and nuclear submarines, facing off against up to 128 other players in real-time battles that can last for weeks. Not only that, you can play on PC or mobile with the same account. So, if you love strategy games, you can claim a very special offer for Real Responders viewers. Click the link in the description to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. But hurry, this offer is only available for the next 30 days. Now, on to the documentary.
A drug-crazed, murderous warlord has captured 11 peacekeeping soldiers.
He was a paranoid schizophrenic, mad, basically.
An elite special forces unit is mobilized.
These guys are united in the ability to just keep going when the going is hellish.
A daring and dangerous plan is drawn up.
The odds were against us, totally.
As executions are threatened, the special forces explode into action. They are outnumbered 5 to 1. They are outgunned with heavy artillery. And their enemy believes in black magic. Now on Black Ops, go behind the scenes on a mission so dangerous, they call it Operation Certain Death. August 2000, Sierra Leone, a small war-torn nation on the West African coast. For almost a decade, a loose alliance of murderous rebel gangs has been fighting for control of the country. Their leaders are driven by the prospect of fabulous wealth. This is the world center of the trade in illegal blood diamonds.
Blood diamonds had become an extraordinarily important factor in the violence which was going on.
There are daily raids on undefended rural villages. The rebels often take all the children away, turning them into child soldiers. Those left behind were often punished by amputation.
They would chop arms off short sleeve or long sleeve style. So short sleeve was above the elbow, long sleeve was below the elbow. The aim of doing so was to spread terror across the country in some strange way to prove their power.
One of the most brutal of these gangs is a group of about 1,000 fighters known as the West Side Boys.
The West Side Boys, drugs and alcohol, that's how they fueled their war.
They were rounding up local women. There's little doubt that sex and drugs featured quite prominently in their behavior and activities. So they were a dangerous group of people simply because they were totally unpredictable.
If that wasn't bad enough, they had this belief that voodoo would protect them to such an extent it would make them bulletproof.
One man who served nearly 2 years with the West Side Boys is 26-year-old Black Zorro. He was recruited by the rebels, aged just 14, and rose to become a trusted junior officer.
Well, the smoke, the weed.
Well, we used to smoke plenty of marijuana. And as for drink, we had lots of homemade strong alcohol called hard wine. Cocaine was sometimes available, but heroin was all over the place. If you went to the jungle at that time, you would find everybody high on heroin. I was often high all day. The drugs made me feel strong and ready for battle. As soon as I took them, I was ready for any fight.
To save Sierra Leone from total collapse, a global coalition intervenes with military force. British troops in particular play a leading role in keeping the peace. and in training the local army to stand on its own.
We were demonstrating a wider commitment of the Western world to what at the time was a struggling democracy in a very poor part of Africa. So I think there was an important symbolic value in our intervention.
On a quiet Friday afternoon, 11 military training advisors from Britain's Royal Irish Regiment set out on a routine patrol. At this junction, their commander, Major Alan Marshall, decides to turn down a dirt road leading into the jungle. He's heading straight into the heart of West Side Boys territory.
I don't know why they left the main road and came into our territory. It was a no-go zone for anybody except us.
The unofficial reason may be that he was actually there with a mission to try and scope out what their forces were like, how powerful they were, what weapons they were armed with, and what they would be like as a fighting force to come up against.
The British don't realise they've already been spotted by West Side Boys scouts hiding in the forest.
We saw them as a major threat. They came to our camp without authorization. We didn't know their intentions, and we thought they were here to spy on us, so we couldn't just let them leave.
They reach the riverside, where one side of the rebel base is situated, and immediately they get there, they're surrounded by what can only be described as a seething, screaming mob of West Side Boys.
Heavily outnumbered and with no means of escape, the soldiers are forced to surrender.
It's very clear very quickly that this is not a friendly situation.
The well-trained, well-armed soldiers are taken prisoner by this crazed mob of drugged-out jungle gangsters.
We arrested the soldiers to get attention from the international community. We wanted to stop hiding in the jungle, and we thought we could use them to get what we wanted.
The 11 British soldiers are beaten, stripped of their valuables, and taken off to a stinking jungle hut. At the Ministry of Defence headquarters in London, news of the missing soldiers reaches Britain's Chief General.
We weren't quite sure just how serious it was to start with. I knew about the West Side Boys. I'd been to Sierra Leone, I'd been briefed about them, but I wasn't quite sure what they would do.
General Guthrie and Defence Secretary Hoon convene a crisis meeting in their Situation Room, deep in the basement.
Problem was, how were we going to get these people who'd been kidnapped, who were in tremendous danger of either being tortured, killed, or split up around Sierra Leone? So there was a real urgency about this.
They knew nothing. They had no intelligence, they had no eyes on the rebel base, they didn't know the rebel numbers, they didn't know what weaponry they had, and most worryingly of all, they didn't know whether the British soldiers would get killed in the rescue operation.
The British are haunted by the memory of a disastrous rescue mission in Africa 7 years earlier. This was the infamous Black Hawk Down incident. 18 American servicemen were killed when their helicopters were shot down by a rocket and their bodies paraded through the streets of Mogadishu, Somalia.
Obviously, reports are going to the Prime Minister. He would be briefed.
And I remember him saying, well, is this very dangerous? I said, yes, very dangerous. Are people likely to be killed? I said, almost certainly.
Terrified of the fallout from a failed rescue, the British government decides to try to negotiate for the hostages' release.
I was perfectly content for negotiations to be begun, but I have to say in the background as well, we were always preparing to take military action to release them.
If negotiations fail, there will be no choice but to take the hostages back by force. 3 days into the crisis, a team of specialist negotiators from Scotland Yard arrive in Africa. They will try to peacefully secure the hostages' release. Leading the talks on the rebels' side is their commander, a 24-year-old warlord calling himself Brigadier General Fode Calais.
Calais was paranoid schizophrenic. He was certainly very paranoid and very deluded.
Fode Calais was the best commander we had. He was a skilled soldier and he led from the front.
He was so deluded to the extent that he believed his rebel group had the power to, for example, force the British out of Sierra Leone.
Everybody knew that when he gave orders, you had to follow them because he took responsibility for all his soldiers.
At his first meeting with the negotiators, Calais makes a rambling series of demands. These range from simply wanting an amnesty for the West Side boys to outrageously insisting all British leave the country. Most insanely of all, Calais himself wants to be named president of Sierra Leone.
In some cases, it will be quite apparent from an early situation that the prospect of a successful negotiated solution with the victims coming out unharmed is low. That may be a factor of history of the group, the demands and the nature of the demands that are being made, the political ideology. It may be from a range of factors that you can make that judgment.
The negotiators are walking a dangerous tightrope. Calais' demands can never be met, but the team must make him believe they might. The hope is that as long as he keeps talking, the hostages will be kept alive.
Clearly they didn't wish to kill them at the outset and they saw some value in them, and that's why they kept them alive. So that was the good news. The bad news in this situation is the unpredictability and the volatility. So in the blink of an eye you can move from a situation where you have stable, well-treated hostages to them being killed.
To confirm that the hostages are being well treated, the negotiators insist on meeting with Major Marshall, the patrol leader, in person. Calais agrees. It's a decision he will come to regret.
Major Marshall, the man who was in charge of the British patrol, had been captured. He recognised in these meetings an opportunity to pass over some vital intelligence in a clandestine fashion to the British side.
The people who'd been abducted here were professional military people. They foresaw where this was going.
What he had done is, during the various walkabouts that the rebels had proudly given them of the base, saying, there is our anti-aircraft weapons and there are our mortars and these kind of things, during those walkabouts, Major Marshall had noted down every single defence that he could see. Back in their room, where they were locked in captivity, he had drawn up a detailed map of the rebel base, mapping out all the positions and all their strengths. And he'd taken that piece of paper, rolled it up very tightly, and poked it inside a pen lid.
When Major Marshall meets one of the men from Scotland Yard, they shake hands and make a secret exchange. If Calais spots what they are doing, it will be a disaster. But incredibly, the negotiator manages to put the object in his pocket without being noticed.
I wouldn't characterise these as a highly professional group of hostage takers. The fact that they allowed that handshake allowed an exchange of intelligence. That was not a shrewd move on their part.
It's an unexpected but crucial breakthrough. At last, the British have some intelligence to begin planning a rescue mission. And there is only one group that has skills to carry it out. Britain's legendary Special Forces unit, the SAS. They are the pioneers in the art of black ops, with a history stretching back as far as the Second World War.
The SAS, the British Special Air Services, they're the special operations force that we modeled all of our special operations after. They set the model for the rest of us to follow.
Through the years, they have constantly adapted and improved, playing a crucial role in every major British conflict, from the streets of Northern Ireland, to the polar wastes of the Falkland Islands, to the deserts of Iraq. The SAS are famous for being ready to fight in any environment and to carry out the missions with absolute secrecy.
Go! Go, go, go!
Small unit, just a few hundred people, the elite of the elite. They have to go through a brutal entry course to prove that they measure up. It washes the majority of the applicants out.
Those that make it through the infamous selection procedure are honoured by having the SAS wings and dagger pinned or badged to their army berets.
I joined the army to be a soldier and take up the duties that includes. And as a badged member of the SAS, that is about as pure as the driven snow as you can get in terms of soldiering.
The SAS have two particular specialities. One is storming difficult targets. In London, in 1980, they famously rescued 19 hostages, breaking a terrorist siege of the Iranian embassy.
The SAS pioneered the art of bursting onto a scene and rescuing hostages. That means things like fast roping from helicopters, breaching doors, throwing in a stun grenade to stun everyone inside, and then quickly firing and taking all of the hostile parties out, leaving the civilians. That is what they perfected.
Go, go, go!
The training for releasing hostages is quite intense, as you can imagine, because there's not a lot of room for error. You know, you don't get second chances when you're dealing with people's lives.
They don't have all the special gear that the Americans have. What the SAS guys will tell you is, yes, what we lack in gear, we have to make up for in skills.
Their other great skill is jungle warfare.
Jungle warfare is, in many people's eyes, one of the purest forms of fighting. You've got to really get attuned in with your surroundings. There's no open spaces, it's closed in, it's a tight environment, so it's on top of you.
Now the unit was preparing to put both of these specialities into practice and start planning an audacious rescue using the smuggled map. The crisis has been dragging on for almost 7 days, but the negotiators continue to try and seek a peaceful settlement. Calais is now asking for something more reasonable, some medicine for his camp, and a satellite telephone so he can call the BBC and announce his grievances to the world. The British quickly agree if they can have some of the hostages in return.
There was a major negotiating success. 5 hostages were released in exchange for a satellite phone and medicines. Now, that was a win-win situation because, one, it's worthwhile having effective and good communications, with the hostile elements. 2, medicines are a good idea, particularly if they're going to be used to treat any of your individuals. And 3, it provides intelligence opportunity.
It's a masterstroke, which will change the course of the operation. Almost half of the men are now free. What's more, the British can use the signal from the satellite phone to pinpoint Calais' secret hideout. Unknown to him or anyone outside a select inner circle, a task force has arrived in Sierra Leone to begin secret preparations for a rescue. It consists of about 300 men. Most are from Britain's frontline airborne force, the Parachute Regiment, known to all in the British Army as simply the Paras. But they are merely there as support troops. The rescue itself will be handled by a 50-strong team from the elite Special Air Service, the SAS, and about 20 colleagues from the British Royal Navy's own Special Forces unit, the SBS, or Special Boat Service. To avoid arousing any suspicion, their mission is given an innocuous code name, Operation Barras.
I'm often asked, how on earth does Britain choose these rather curious names for its operation, in contrast to the United States that talks about Operation Freedom and has rather dramatic names for their military activities. And the answer is, I'm afraid, rather prosaic and probably very British, which is that we allow a computer to generate randomly names that are then, providing they're appropriate, allocated accordingly.
With the tacit support of the Sierra Leone government, the men of Operation Barras establish a covert base just outside the capital.
It wasn't until that we moved forward into Sierra Leone itself that the focus starts coming down. Then you start thinking, right, this is going to happen. Your kit's being packed as to what you want to take in with you. You're beginning to get a bit more intelligence. Briefing boards are going up. We need to be ready for it.
The SAS start gathering as much intelligence as they can about the rebels and their jungle hideout. Their preferred plan is to send a small team upriver at night in SBS boats. Moving in total darkness and total silence, the rescue team can secretly enter the rebel camp, sneak into the hostage hut, and quickly escape with the prisoners, hopefully without a shot being fired. As the troops wait for the green light, they begin rehearsing for the mission.
There was a floor plan built at the village so that you knew roughly how far you had to go, what your limits of your particular arcs were and that sort of stuff. An arc being where you can fire and where you can't fire. At the height of battle, it could become quite confusing as to who's where and who's doing what.
But there is still no permission to mount the rescue. The final go can only come from Defence Secretary Jeff Hoon in London. The fate of the 6 remaining British hostages hangs in the balance. If a bargain cannot be struck for their lives, there will be an epic battle to free them.
The Brits were cocky. We would give them orders and they would say, no, we won't accept your command. They were extremely stubborn, actually. Sometimes we would talk to them, tell them what to do, and they would ignore us. They really did not make life easy for themselves. Sometimes Kale would have to slap them around a bit to make them understand. He would shake them up and hit them hard. He had to treat them roughly, so they knew he was in charge.
The key thing would be reading the mood music, you know, whether it was positive or it's negative, you know, in terms of their attitude, because the volatility is the key element in this, and whether they're going to behave in a rational and thoughtful sort of way, or whether they're escalating to a point where it's clearly never going to be resolved, you know, amicably.
Defence Secretary Jeff Hoon has still not authorised a full-scale rescue mission. But he has given the go-ahead for a secretive and highly dangerous operation. A 4-man SAS surveillance team stealthily enters the jungle. Their job is to provide more detailed intelligence about conditions in the rebel base.
In the first place, they had to be inserted around the village. Actually, it meant that some of them spent several days in swamp, crawling through some of the most unpleasant conditions I think anyone could face.
Moving and operating in total silence and advancing just a few feet each hour, the men slowly approach rebel territory, looking for a concealed position where they can see, but not be seen.
That team was tasked with setting up an observation post, an OP. An OP, it's like a grave dug in the jungle floor.
They know how to quietly get into a scene if necessary, whether it's marching into a jungle invisibly and sitting in an observation post under a tarp for 3 weeks, staring at a target so nobody knows they're there. That's what they do.
You dig a pit, you jump in the pit, you cover it with vegetation, and you lie there for as long as it takes to keep eyes on the base until either the mission is called in, and it happens, or the mission's called off and you withdraw.
This kind of surveillance is another SAS speciality, and it takes incredible reserves of patience and skill. The men must eat, sleep, and maintain their watch for days on end, making only the smallest of movements.
Throughout the special operations world, they have this expression, the quiet professionals. And these guys, when they're out on the mission, that's really what they are.
Straight away, they discover 3 pieces of bad news. Firstly, the captives are no longer in the rebel base where they were first taken hostage. They have been moved across a wide river to a smaller camp, even deeper into the jungle. Second, the original plan for the assault along the river will not work. It is full of concealed sandbanks, and the Special Forces boats cannot use it. On top of that, the jungle is so thick that an approach by land is also impossible. The only option is a full frontal assault by helicopter.
If we'd have sneaked up and not fired a shot, taken everybody down without killing anybody, then that would have been the preferred option. As it was, it couldn't pan out that way. We couldn't get to them. We couldn't do it that way. So, you know, we had to go in and give them a bloody nose.
The only helicopter up to the job is one of the biggest in the world. The twin-rotor HC-2 Chinook. But an air assault using one of these beasts has its own specific problems.
Well, the obvious thing about a helicopter is that they are very noisy, and the element of surprise is lost if the enemy can hear a helicopter coming at distance.
Chinooks can carry a huge payload, but they're also slow, hard to maneuver, and easy to spot. Hence their unofficial nickname, the Flying School Bus.
If a Chinook gets hit and knocked out of the sky with a large number of SAS people in it, it would be very serious.
To make matters worse, most of the West Side Boys group remain in their main base on the south side of the river. They have a battery of heavy weapons, including rocket-propelled grenades, heavy machine guns, and mortars, any of which could easily shoot a Chinook out of the sky or rain artillery fire down on the hostage camp across the river. Any rescue mission would quickly turn into a suicide mission. The SAS commanders must rethink the entire operation. Time is running out. Rebel leader Fode Calais is getting more and more impatient with the endless rounds of negotiations.
It could change in the blink of an eye. It was highly unpredictable, highly volatile, and groups like this had already killed many times before. Even if they were compliant today, you could not in any way be assured of the safety of the hostages tomorrow or the day after.
The negotiators from Scotland Yard call Calais daily on his satellite phone. But with each conversation, he becomes more unpredictable. He is spending his days taking drugs and drinking heavily. By the start of every afternoon, he is thoroughly drunk. Eventually, due to the lack of electricity in his camp, Calais' phone runs out of battery and goes dead.
We had a message saying negotiations had failed.
The safety of the hostages is now at serious risk.
One evening, he called us all out and said, "We're going to shoot one of them."
He took Major Marshall, the British commander, to the edge of the jungle, made him kneel. They put an assault rifle to his head and basically pulled the trigger.
Calais' rifle is empty. But next time, in all likelihood, it will be loaded. When news of this outrage arrives in London, Jeff Hoon decides that the time for talking is finally over.
We were certainly receiving very detailed information about what was going on inside the huts where our men were being held prisoner. And I think one of the key pieces of information I received is that they were being subject to mock executions, that weapons were being pointed at them, apparently being fired. And that kind of behavior was totally unacceptable as far as I was concerned.
Operation Barras is a go.
Well, the SAS I think everybody in the army would admit are probably the most suitable people to do this. They are trained in special operations. They're trained in rescuing people who have been kidnapped. They've done it in other places.
Everyone involved in the mission knows the odds are stacked heavily against them. In fact, the mission is so dangerous, the men on the ground have given it their own name.
When they realised they could only go in via air, that was when the men of the SAS, the men who were tasked to go in and do this hostage rescue, coined the phrase, the nickname for the mission, Operation Certain Death.
Assuming they even make it to their target without being shot out of the sky, the rescue force will be outnumbered more than 5 to 1. And their enemy, who believe black magic makes them invincible to bullets, will fight fearlessly and recklessly.
In a battle, you don't check to see who you've killed. When I fire my weapon, there will be many victims. I don't know who is dead or alive. All I know is when I pull the trigger, the bullets will be flying around the jungle, and no one will be left in front of me.
The men of Operation Barras are assembling before dawn to launch their attack. A dangerous air assault on a well-defended jungle hideout. The mission will be personally overseen by General Charles Guthrie, one-time commander of the SAS, now head of all Britain's armed forces.
We had a very good plan, but it was a risky plan, because in these things you never quite know what the enemy are going to do.
Guthrie makes things plain to his political masters. The mission to rescue 6 British hostages is likely to incur heavy casualties.
General Guthrie made clear that this operation was not without risk, that he could not guarantee that we would not lose soldiers in the process.
In an attempt to overcome the staggering odds facing the rescue team, General Guthrie signs off on a new strategy: 2 simultaneous attacks. First, a team of about 50 elite SAS troops will approach the small jungle camp on the north bank, Geberi Bana. This is where the captives are located, along with rebel commander Fode Calais. To surprise the rebels, they will fast rope down from the hovering choppers, landing just feet from the hostage hut.
We didn't know what to expect, so all the time that we know where the hostages are is the time that we have to act in, because if they take them somewhere else, it's jungle for jungle for jungle.
At the same time, the force of 150 paratroopers, who have been waiting in reserve, will launch the second attack. Landing by helicopter on the south side of the river, they will strike at the main West Side Boys base, Magbeni, to distract the large force of rebels there and disable their heavy weaponry. The mission is planned for dawn on the 8th of September, the 15th day of the crisis. But at the very last moment, there's a hitch. The SAS observation team, hiding in the jungle, sends an urgent message.
The mission was originally planned for first light on a Saturday morning, but in fact those who had been literally crawling through swamp in order to get near to the huts and near to the village took longer than they had planned.
The plan requires the observation team to move within a few feet of the hostage house to provide covering fire, but they must move at night, at an agonizingly slow pace, to avoid being spotted. They ask for a 24-hour delay.
Because of the time it took to get into position, it actually was delayed until Sunday morning.
Nights before the attack,
The night before the attack, everybody was out of it. We had all been partying. I was in my hut taking lots of drugs because it was raining outside. We had no idea what was about to happen.
One day later, Operation Certain Death finally lifts off. They fly out to sea and muster off the coast.
I don't think there was a guy there that didn't leave a letter with one of his best mates to give to his loved ones should something happen.
At the Ministry of Defence headquarters in London, all that Jeff Hoon can do now is wait and hope.
I think it's important to bear in mind that we were not sitting watching live TV footage of what was taking place. Essentially, I knew that the operation was underway. I knew that the operation would proceed along the lines that had been briefed to me.
2 Chinook helicopters are carrying the 50-strong SAS contingent, followed by a third with the first wave of support troops from the Paras. Each SAS man is carrying more than 80 pounds of kit, including his body armour, his M14 assault rifle, and enough ammunition and grenades for hours of fighting.
You know your job inside out by then, so you know what your mate's going to be doing, you know where he's going when he gets off the chopper, you know what you're going to do if he doesn't manage to go that way. The plan's in your face now, it's stored up here, you know, you're just waiting for that ramp to come down now and you're off.
On operations, you get psyched up. There's no question about that. Everybody wants it to, you get a sort of working together, cooperation, which is quite difficult to explain because it's extraordinarily dangerous what you're doing. But, you know, well-trained soldiers get on and do it.
After a 10-minute flight, the 6 helicopters are on the final approach to their targets.
The 4-man observation team were in contact with the pilots and telling them, you can come in, there's no one moving, it's light enough to see, it's light enough to see. And so the airborne assault force flew up to the rebel base using the river upon which the rebel base was situated to hide their progress as they came in. So the helicopters were invisible to the naked eye, but far more importantly, you couldn't hear them because the jungle to either side of the river masked the approach of the assault.
At 6:30 in the morning, the thunderous noise overhead rouses the rebels.
Early in the morning, I stepped outside my hut, and as I was looking around, I heard a strange sound. I turned to see a huge helicopter coming in. Then, men started to drop down from ropes onto the ground. By now, the helicopter was overhead, making a huge wind. I was scared.
The most urgent objective is the hostage hunt. The entire operation hinges on getting to the captive soldiers before rebels get there first and execute them. It is now that the reconnaissance team, who have been lying almost motionless for a week in the jungle, finally break cover. Just in time to kill the rebels guarding the hostage hunt.
They fight their way in there and they scream out, British soldiers, British soldiers!
British soldiers!
And so the hostages know it's the friendly force coming to rescue them that they've been dreaming of happening for some time.
Across the river, in the main rebel stronghold of Magbeni, the support force from the parachute regiment is slowly approaching their target. Their mission is to prevent the core group of West Side boys interfering with the rescue.
Operations nearly always have unforeseen consequences, and you've got to be aware of that and be prepared to react.
Chinook comes in, hovers over this flat area of ground. First guy jumps out, first para jumps out with his weapons and his Bergen on his back, and lo and behold, he lands up to his neck in a swamp.
That initially caused some problems for the operation because men were literally sinking into the ground.
There's nothing worse than if a plan does go wrong and you just are left high and dry.
But as soon as they reach the edge of the base, disaster strikes.
Very quickly, things go really quite badly wrong. A mortar round goes up and lands in the tree under which the command element of the parachute regiment guys is situated. It explodes in the tree, so it's like an airburst. And very, very quickly, you've got the whole command element of that parachute regiment force injured and taken out and needing evacuating.
The only member of the 8-man command unit to escape serious injury is a young officer, Captain Danny Matthews. He now finds himself directing a major battle for the first time. Quickly regrouping his troops, he orders them to eliminate the greatest source of danger, the mortar. By this time, in the smaller jungle camp on the north side of the river, the rebel army is now fighting back. The SAS realize that the battle on the ground is not going according to their carefully orchestrated plan.
When I left the chopper, we took fire from a direction that we hadn't planned to take fire from. We all ended up stacked up in a completely different way, facing a completely different part of the village than we were going to because we took so much fire from behind.
I tried to gather my group together on the edge of the forest and take cover behind one of the buildings. I could see things were getting very hot, so we moved up.
We knew how heavily armed the West Side boys were. There is little doubt either that they fought, and they fought hard once they realised what was happening.
The disciplined special forces managed to hold the rebels at bay long enough for the hostages to be escorted to the helicopter landing zone.
You can't afford to switch off. It would be a terrible shame to go through the village, rescue all the hostages, have a marvellous day out, and then get shot getting on the chopper on the way out.
The mission appears to be on the verge of success when one SAS soldier is hit by a wild spray of gunfire.
A soldier called Brad Tinian, who was a legend within the SAS, was hit and seriously wounded.
There are several serious casualties on one side of the river. A dying SAS trooper on the other side, and although the hostages have now been freed, they are still not out of danger. The success of Operation Certain Death hangs in the balance.
These guys are united in the ability to just keep going when the going is hellish.
Although the rebels could not shoot the British helicopters down, they have inflicted serious damage on the two units fighting their way through the jungle.
The odds were against us, totally. We flew into their village, into their backyard, with two of the biggest helicopters in the world. By rights, I mean, if they'd have been switched on, they should have smashed those choppers straight out of the sky. Would have been lucky to get anybody in there.
One of the men, Trooper Brad Tinian, is seriously wounded.
Tremendous efforts were made, I know, to save his life. A helicopter pilot picked him up and took him out to a ship that we had stationed off Sierra Leone. Sadly, he had died before further medical attention could be given to him.
By now, all 6 hostages have also been flown out to the waiting ship. In London, General Guthrie, himself a former Special Forces soldier, receives a coded message from the field just before appearing live on breakfast television.
We decided to attack the place where the hostages were being kept at 6:30 this morning. So the situation is still very confused. There is fighting going on, but the first indications are that the hostages are safe. I don't know what condition they're in, but they are safe.
The hostages may be safe, but the battle is not yet over.
The men who went to join the battle were all killed. Many of them were sharing a hut with me. I lost most of my friends.
Objective number 2 for the SAS is the rebel leader, Fode Calais. One of the 4-man fire teams is assigned to take down his house.
They basically kick open the doors and clear each of the rooms, and in one of those rooms there's a bed, like a wooden bed with a mattress on top of it. And they're about to leave the room, because there's no one else in there, when some smart guy thinks to look under the bed. And cowering underneath the bed, not able to move, not able to say a word, is the West Side Boys leader, Fode Calais, the guy who was demanding that he be made the president of Sierra Leone.
With their leader now a prisoner himself, the rest of the West Side Boys melt away into the forest.
We had no support left, so there was no way we could offer resistance in our part of the village. All I heard was the sound of British heavy weapons. So I decided the best thing to do was escape while I could.
Black Zorro and several others fled into the jungle and ran as far as they could from the battlefield. The British were now left standing alone. Today, Black Zorro is returning to the village of Gaberibana, where the hostages were kept, and where he lived for almost 18 months as a West Side Boy fighter. It is the first time he has been back to this place since the battle with the British 12 years ago.
This is the place where Calais was living, the commander in charge of this place. Well, it was destroyed. A lot of bullet shots, a lot of damage. Because the helicopter came right here to bombard this area, to kill Calais. This is where I was living. Here was my room where I slept. They wiped it, but I wrote my name here before, Black Zorro. Early in the morning, I woke up from my room. Straight away, I went over here. I was standing here, relieving myself. I heard the sound from that side. Straight away, I saw the helicopters, people dropping from them. I rushed into the house. I tried to wake up my friends. I took my AK-47 and I stood there. There were gunshots all over, so we tried to resist, to return fire. But it was too late. The incoming fire was too heavy and the British were all over the place. So I decided to escape to the bush. I ran and cleared a path by shooting heavily into the trees. I shot about 30 bullets into this area to try and clear the way. They went right over there, this way. I went through the bush. I left behind heavy firing. The British were everywhere. It was risky because we were being ambushed from all sides, so I managed to escape by the will and the power of God.
All of the hostages from the Royal Irish Regiment made a full recovery. Many still serve in the British military to this day. Fode Calais, the rebel leader, was put on trial in Freetown and sentenced to 50 years in prison. The other West Side boys that survived the battle joined a reconciliation process and returned to civilian life. Today, Black Zorro is homeless, living on the streets of Freetown, the capital city.
Well, the West Side boys broke up and everybody went their own ways. Those that survived had to keep surviving. Those that were captured had to face up to prison. And that was the end of us. We finished now.
Operation Barras had a massive impact on Sierra Leone. In the months that followed, rebels all over the country laid down their arms.
It sent a message to the rebels which was clear and could not be misinterpreted. If you continue to do what you do, we will come after you and we will hunt you down in your rebel bases, wherever you are, in the jungle, with ultimate force, and your days are numbered.
Today, Sierra Leone is still poor, but it is peaceful. This one mission brought a decisive end to years of conflict. And it's all due to the skill and bravery of the SAS. An international flight hijacked by armed terrorists is flown to hostile territory.
Every few hours they say that they are going to execute us.
Demands are made. Deadlines are set. An elite special forces team known as the Unit moves into action.
To kill someone is relatively simple. To rescue someone is much more complicated.
As time is running out, a daring plan is launched from thousands of miles away.
I think it'll stand as one of the most bold special force operations in modern history.
Now on Black Ops, behind the scenes of one of the most daring rescue missions ever made. Operation Thunderbolt. Air France Flight 139 from Tel Aviv to Paris makes a stopover in Athens. On board the airplane are 248 passengers and crew members.
I was putting nail polish on my nails, and we were talking to the girl sitting in front of us. I didn't suspect anything.
Shortly after takeoff, terrorists storm the cockpit. One of them takes over the radio and announces the flight is hijacked. No one knows where it's headed. In Jerusalem, a routine cabinet meeting is interrupted, and the message is delivered to Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Defense Minister Shimon Peres is also getting the news.
My aide came in and handed me over a small piece of information that said that an Air France plane was hijacked.
Good evening. An Air France jet was hijacked by Palestinian guerrillas today.
The hijacking of Flight 139 is just the latest in a string of terrorist attacks targeting Israeli citizens. 4 years earlier, in 1972, 11 Israeli athletes were killed in an attack on their compound at the Munich Olympics. In the same year, terrorists shot and killed 26 passengers waiting for their luggage in Tel Aviv airport. And in 1974, terrorists sieged a high school in northern Israel, killing 22, most of them young students. Immediately after the hijacking, Israeli special forces are put on high alert. The authorities are expecting the plane to arrive in Tel Aviv. But the hijackers have a different plan. One of them is a trained pilot. He instructs the captain to divert the flight to Libya.
He knew exactly how to fly an airplane, and he had the maps that he needed, and he followed our pilot to see that he's taking him wherever he wants to go.
On the ground in Libya, one desperate passenger pretends to be having a miscarriage in an attempt to escape. She's released and immediately met by Israeli intelligence officers. They learn from her that there are 4 terrorists, 2 German and 2 Palestinian. They are armed with guns and grenades.
The plane continued to fly, and we didn't know to which destination.
It is headed to Africa. In the early hours of June 28th, Air France Flight 139 lands in Entebbe Airport in Uganda, more than 2,000 miles from Tel Aviv. At first, the passengers think the crisis is coming to an end.
They told us we are going to be released in Uganda.
But as soon as they get off the plane, their hopes are dashed.
There were 2 rows of Ugandan soldiers standing with guns, and we were in the middle, and they led us into the terminal of Entebbe. That was the second very big shock.
We were sure that we are free to go. And then we saw that lots of Ugandan soldiers are waiting for us there, and 6 more terrorists were waiting for us there.
Instead of being released, they are led to an unused terminal in Entebbe Airport.
They told us that we are going to stay there, and later they brought us mattresses and blankets.
Soon they receive a visit from Uganda's unpredictable and ruthless ruler, Idi Amin. He offers his services as a mediator in the crisis.
Negotiations between the hijackers and Ugandan officials, led by President Idi Amin, were at a stalemate, but the hijackers did allow the plane's 256 passengers to wait in the airport lounge.
In Jerusalem, the cabinet ministers are wondering if Amin can be trusted.
We didn't know yet. Is it in coordination with the Uganda people? Was it prearranged? We didn't have the slightest idea.
The hijackers still haven't issued any demands. The passengers, unsure of their fate, spend a nervous night in Entebbe airport. In the morning, the terrorists make an announcement.
They are going to separate part of us to the other room, and it will be more comfort for all of us. It sounds regional.
They started to call us by names. After the first few names, we understood that they are calling the Israeli people and the Jewish people. It was a very frightening moment.
For many passengers, the process of a selection between Jews and non-Jews bears echoes of the Holocaust.
It's such a despair, it's such a feeling of, that's it, the end, because you can't do anything. And we knew that they are going to release all the others.
They separated between Jews and non-Jews. The fact that they are Germans and they made a separation really made me outraged.
In Jerusalem, the leaders anxiously follow the news reports from Entebbe as the terrorists announce their demands.
But the hijackers threatened to kill the more than 200 remaining hostages, including 7 Americans, unless Israel and 4 other countries release 53 pro-Palestinian prisoners.
The hijackers set a deadline for their demands.
The terrorists send us a message that if they are not going to get an answer in the next 12 hours or 10 hours, they'll start to execute passengers one by one on an hourly basis.
Israel has a long-standing policy not to give in to terrorists' demands. Defense Minister Shimon Peres knows he needs to start setting in motion a response.
If we can find a political way, why not? But parallel, I started to look for a military solution.
Peres will turn to the Israeli Defense Forces. They have a reputation as one of the best trained armies in the world. Its elite special forces units have carried out many daring operations.
They had a force that was capable. The consequence of them failing, I think, was great. The consequence of the success was even greater.
But Uganda is 2,000 miles away. Staging a rescue mission so far from home and under such a tight deadline seems impossible. The Israeli leaders are trying to devise a response, but they desperately need more time.
I thought we have a chance with a little bit of daring, or much daring, and decisiveness, and surprise, and ingenuity to do the job.
Any operation would be extremely risky.
This was a push for an emerging country. It happened at a period of time where you had an emerging nation whose destiny was uncertain.
The intelligence available is minimal. They don't know how many terrorists are involved, or if they have the backing of the Ugandan army. They could be facing thousands in hostile and unfamiliar territory. But Defense Minister Peres is pushing for a plan.
The first I called in was the commander of the Air Force, who I like very much. I called in the other young commanders. They says, look, we have to look at the map. We have to check where are the radar stations. How can we land?
Joshua Shani, one of Israel's top pilots, gets an urgent phone call.
It's very unusual to get a direct call from the commander of the Air Force. And what he wanted to know is very basic information about the range, about the payload that we can take, about the fuel needed, about the route that it's possible or not to do. I gave him one by one everything he needed to know, and then he said, come back to the headquarters, we'll start planning.
The planners need to know how big a threat the Ugandan army is. They turn to Muki Betsa, a commander with Israeli special forces, who knows the African forces well.
I was sent to train the paratroopers unit for 2 years. They asked me, Muki, what do you know about the Ugandan army? I said, listen, the Ugandan army is not exactly a well-trained army. Not like the IDF in any case.
The planning group considers several options. One involves dropping boats and a parachute force into Lake Victoria by Entebbe.
We've tested parachuting into Lake Victoria, but we didn't have any experience with such things. Our Navy SEALs tried it, and the boats exploded.
Technically, we did not do well in the exercise. That one boat was blown up, and it was kind of, and the second round was better, but say 50% is not good enough for an operation like this.
The Prime Minister sends them back to work.
And he did not approve that operation. He thought it will be very risky, and it was not a wise plan. Some of the military people were very disappointed that that plan was not approved, and he stated, I want another plan as soon as possible, and he set specific guidelines to the plan.
The risks of a failed operation start to sink in.
I thought if it will fail, it will be a boost for terrorists. It will be a shame for Israel. It will make our army look as a second-rate army.
Meanwhile, the government is under enormous pressure from the families of the hostages to give in to the terrorists' demands.
The Prime Minister saw a representative group and revealed that the government had decided to negotiate with the hijackers to secure the release of all of the hostages and was ready to release some terrorists held in Israeli jails in return.
Their message was, do whatever we can to meet the terrorist demand and free our fathers or mothers and relatives.
Secretly, the military planners work according to the new guidelines set by the Prime Minister.
One, it should be a complete surprise. B, the time that planes will land and the military operation will start should be limited to a specific number of minutes.
But they still don't have a plan of action. It's decided to try to pressure Idi Amin to solve the crisis one more time. An old Israeli friend of the Ugandan president calls him.
So he called him early morning. He said, you remember you told me once that your mother told you to help the people of Jerusalem. And that's your chance. Those people that are being kept in your terminal are your guests. But if you will not take good care of them, you might pay a price for it.
The calls convince Israeli leaders that their only remaining option is a daring military raid. But negotiating may allow them to buy more time to solve their big problem. The planners are hampered by a lack of intelligence.
We got Super 8 films and photographs. They gave us information about the distances. We were watching TV. Amin was coming in every evening to see them. So intelligence was coming in slowly, but this wasn't operational intelligence.
On Wednesday, less than 24 hours before the deadline they've set for executions expires, the hijackers release the non-Israeli hostages and allow them to fly back to Paris. It's their first mistake.
We send a team to Paris to interview them. Find out as much as we can details of what is taking place at the terminal.
This is a critical breakthrough. The released passengers provide them with information about the number of terrorists, Ugandan troops helping them, and the exact location of the hostages. With the new intelligence, the odds that the raid may work improve.
We were sure that coming to Entebbe from out of the blue
And Entebbe is so far away from Israel. And with our force, we can finish it in less than 2 minutes.
Trying to gain that upper hand, attack the enemy on your terms, and trying to achieve that element of surprise, and that was probably the greatest thing they had going for them.
Then another piece of encouraging news arrives. Only hours before the executions are due to begin in Entebbe, the hijackers agree to extend the deadline.
We needed time to keep quiet and to keep the attention around the negotiations. If the slightest rumor or indication will leak that we have a military intention, we lost it.
They are still missing a critical piece of intelligence, a detailed image of the terminal.
We asked somebody from that was at that time in Kenya, not an Israeli, to try to fly above the airport by a small plane and try to take pictures where exactly the Air France plane is parked and as much as information he could get from that. And he was able to do that and transfer those photos to us. So altogether, we had quite a clear idea where the hostages are being kept, what is the logistics of the airport, where can a plane land, where's exactly the commercial runway of the airport. There was also a military section of the airport.
The top-secret Israeli counter-terrorism teams, simply known as the Unit, have been put on high alert since the crisis began. It's time to mobilize the troops.
It's a very special unit. It's the cream of the crop. It was developed over the years to carry out intelligence and counter-terrorism operations. And others we call the long arm of the IDF.
The unit has built its mystique by carrying out the most daring missions, operating behind enemy lines and rescuing hostages.
It has this significant reputation because it took part in many special operations.
Like other Black Ops units around the world, the unit's operators have to go through a grueling selection camp to join. The few who pass it are invited to join the team.
The first and foremost attribute or feature is determination.
The operators need a combination of skills: physical ability, intelligence, good technical skills and social skills, because it's teamwork.
Only a few of the unit's operations have ever been made public. Among them, rescuing hostages from terrorists who hijacked a Sabina airline flight in 1972. When the plane arrived in Tel Aviv, the troops pretended to be technicians coming to fix the plane. They then stormed it and rescued all the passengers. In Operation Spring of Youth in Lebanon in 1973, the unit's troops avenged the killing of Israeli athletes during the Munich Olympics.
We came from the sea, came in with the Navy SEALs. We were dressed as tourists. Ehud Barak was my partner. He was dressed as a woman. We got to the heart of Beirut and took out 3 terrorist leaders in retaliation.
I thought those boys, if there is somebody in the world that can do it, they will do it. And they are ready to pay with their life with the slightest hesitation.
The unit is the best chance Israel has. But they only have hours to come up with a plan. If they fail, the terrorists will deliver on their threat and start executing passengers. In the Army's headquarters in Tel Aviv, one plan that initially seemed like an outlandish idea is starting to take shape. Sending a strike force 2,000 miles away and storming the terminal under the cover of darkness.
The plan was to send 4 planes. The first land 7 minutes ahead of the others.
Joshua Shani will be the lead pilot. He will fly the assault team, 29 Matkal soldiers led by Yoni Netanyahu. With him is Muki Betza, who was part of the group that planned the operation. To add to the element of surprise, the Special Forces team assembles a convoy of official-looking vehicles.
CBS showed a couple of times Idi Amin coming with a Mercedes with 2 Land Rover Jeeps to visit the terminal, to visit the hostages. We sort of said, why wouldn't we do the same?
1 Mercedes and 2 Land Rovers. We will all be dressed up as Ugandans, basically staging the arrival of Idi Amin or another dignitary, as they did every night. The plan is to get there and completely surprise them, storm the terminal, take out the terrorists, and release the hostages.
The rest of the force, another 200 top infantrymen and paratroopers, hand-picked for the mission, will arrive in the other 3 Hercules planes.
The other 3 will wait 7 minutes in a holding pattern just south of him, around the border of Kenya and Uganda, just to make sure that we will keep the maximum surprise, minimum noise.
They will land in 7-minute intervals. Their job, to secure the airport, fight back any retaliation, and provide backup for the rescue team. The unit's senior operators are assembled. Amir Offer is at home, just days before finishing his mandatory service with the unit.
It was a very frightening phone call, I must admit. I was told, come immediately to your base. All of us were very worried. It was a very dangerous operation.
Practice begins. They need to be ready for every potential scenario.
Our planning seemed perfect, with a high probability that throughout the journey, the landing, and the raid on the terminal, we will be able to maintain the surprise element.
Israel's leaders and top military commanders are invited to observe a dress rehearsal on an improvised model of the terminal.
When you decide on operation, you have to take a risk. The question is it a reasonable risk? I wouldn't do it to commit suicide. And when I saw the boys, I saw the preparation, my self-assurance grew up.
At the end of the rehearsal, the Chief of Staff wants to know what are their chances of succeeding.
He collected all the commanders together after the rehearsal. He asked each of us to say if we believe in the plan or not. All of us said that 70 to 80% it would fail. But we decided to go.
When you have the type of well-trained personnel, and some of the ground forces are exceptionally well-trained, you do what you have to do in order to, to accomplish the mission.
The hijackers' new deadline is approaching fast. Perez, the Minister of Defense, needs to convince Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin to green-light the risky operation.
He struggled with that decision for a day and a night. He told me that he hardly slept.
I wanted to carry out the mission. I wanted to do it. I saw that it's possible. I wanted to be a part of it. And I was very anxious to get airborne and get out and do it. And we were sitting there waiting for an approval.
5 days into the crisis, on Friday, encouraged by the latest developments, Rabin, who was a former general, is persuaded.
He accompanied me to the elevators and said to me, Amos, if the military operation will fail, and the chances are 50-50, I will resign the following day.
Prime Minister Rabin wants the entire government to sign off on what has been until now a secret plan. As time is running out, 200 of Israel's top fighters are taking off to Africa, ready to carry out the daring rescue raid now codenamed Operation Thunderbolt. The final go or no-go will be given while they are in the air.
We took off to the mission without the final approval of the government.
The assault teams had less than 24 hours to prepare before changing to Ugandan uniforms, their operational disguise as they attempt to pass themselves off as an official escort to Idi Amin's motorcade.
I was totally sure that no one will approve the operation. It will be cancelled within a few hours. It was too risky, too far. It was a crazy operation.
The troops are getting a quick last-minute briefing.
Yoni Netanyahu, which was our commander, explained that we have a very short time to prepare the operation. Therefore, we will not discuss any activities of other forces. He just told each one of us what's the specific role of each squad.
Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, an emergency cabinet meeting is called. Unless all ministers approve the plan, the troops will be called back. The Hercules planes have been in the air for nearly 2 hours when a message arrives. Operation Thunderbolt is a go.
Given that the consequence of both failure and success for the state of Israel, I think it was a very, very tough call, but it was one they had to make.
In Entebbe, for the hostages, the situation seems hopeless.
We couldn't even, for 1%, think that the Israelis are coming to save us there. No way. We didn't know what's going on in Israel. Nobody was talking to us.
The deadline for executions to begin approaches.
Every few hours they say that they are going to execute us, each and every one of us. I remember that my thought was I would like to be one of the first because I couldn't think seeing the others being killed.
It was despairing, not giving any hope.
The 4 Hercules planes head north, then turn south, flying over the Red Sea and over to Africa. In the cockpit, lead pilot Joshua Shani feels the burden of responsibility.
The fear was from failure, real fear, big fear. 29 years old, it's all on my shoulder, and if I screw it up, this is a national disaster.
The journey is some 2,200 miles long, and it involves crossing hostile airspace. If detected, they could be shot down.
We kept radio silence because we didn't want anybody from the enemy countries next to us to listen.
To avoid getting detected, they fly as low as only 100 feet above the sea, making the journey a rough one. Even so, some of the troops use the time to prepare.
I loaded my AK-47 and I opened the safety pin, and my friend who was sitting beside me shouted at me, "You are not supposed to open your safety pin to load the weapon within a plane." I told him, "Shut up, this is a real war."
Others, like Martin Velani, the operation's deputy commander, and Yoni Netanyahu, the unit's commander, managed to catch a few minutes of sleep.
Both of us occupied this bed with full gear and weapons. We tried to sleep. It's a long flight.
I found very difficult to understand how a guy that's going to storm and his chances to get killed are 50% can sleep like a baby, and he did sleep like a baby.
Just as they get to the border of Kenya and Uganda, the pilots break formation and separate. Shani, carrying the attack force, continues directly towards Entebbe, while the others reach the airport from another direction. The aim is to time their arrival to maximize the potential surprise.
Very dangerous, you know, flying into an airfield that enemy forces are controlling with aircraft that are essentially unarmed. You know, they didn't have cover, didn't have gunships covering them to be able to come in, land.
When we had to pick up the time of landing, we knew it should be the middle of the night sometime.
As the plane approaches Entebbe Airport, the control tower, anticipating another arriving flight, asks the plane to identify itself. Shani's answer could seal the fate of the mission.
In broke
In broken English, they start asking questions. And our captain, he gave the right answer.
Shani manages to pass as another incoming flight without raising suspicion, and his plane lands at 11:01 p.m. Uganda time, right on schedule. The rest of the force, 200 troops, should arrive within the next 15 minutes.
When I was at approximately 1,500, 1,000 feet over the lake, I saw the lights of the runway very clear. And all of a sudden, I was relieved. The flight was behind me. I was in the formation. I was exactly on time. The runway is in front of me. Piece of cake. And then, when I was at 300 feet, approximately 300 feet, all of a sudden, the lights went off. Complete darkness. My first officer unbuckled his harness, stood up, peered through the windows, looking for any clue. Where is the runway?
But until then, the Matkal operators are on their own.
Of the intelligence that we got was that there are between 200 and 1,000 soldiers in this specific airbase. And we were supposed to be alone for about 7 to 10 minutes. When you think that you are 29 against, let's say, 1,000 and about 8 to 15 terrorists, it's a crazy operation.
Everything goes according to the plan.
I taxied all the way almost to the old terminal, where the hostages were held.
While the plane is still taxiing, the assault force gets into the official-looking vehicles to pose as Amin's motorcade. The next moments are critical. They have to get right up to the terminal without being detected.
We jumped out with the Mercedes. The air was fresh right after the rain. We are driving slowly, adjusting our speed to our surroundings.
In the Mercedes are Betza and Netanyahu, the commanders of the assault. Behind, the rest of the force in Land Rovers, pretending to be an official escort.
I remember these two feelings. One is a feeling of terrible loneliness, and the second is that I saw 29 shadows of people or soldiers holding their weapons in the darkness, and I thought to myself, how many of these will stay alive in 5 minutes?
The success of the entire operation depends on maintaining the surprise, and on no one daring to stop the president's convoy.
We look straight ahead, and we see 2 Ugandan soldiers standing there, a little bored.
The troops have only seconds to react.
The guy yells, "Advance!" I tell Yoni, forget it, it's routine. But he hesitates for a second and then says, "Take them out."
There was a burst of non-silenced fire, and at this moment, it was obvious that the element of surprise gone.
I thought this is when the slaughter begins.
Their cover is blown. They're exposed and outnumbered, and still more than 200 meters away from their target. The hijackers could start executing hostages immediately. Hundreds of lives are on the line.
We jumped off and started running. And as we are running, a Ugandan soldier opens fire right above us. And I shoot around him, hitting him in the chest, and he drops. Any Ugandan soldier we see is shot. There was massive shooting.
The Ugandan soldiers are confused.
Ugandans in general always view Israel and Israelis as special people on earth. And any confrontation with them is as if you are confronting children, special children of God. So in that view, our soldiers were saying, the children of God has come. So anything to do with God to Ugandans, that was beyond human control.
Inside the terminal, the hostages are terrified. They don't know who is shooting or why.
I thought the terrorists will shoot, the Ugandan soldiers will shoot, and we will be dead in a few minutes.
They were shooting, terrible shooting all around. Noises, shouting, lights, everything. We were sure that that's the end. It comes now.
Everything now depends on how quickly the assault force can get to the hostages.
It was critical to enter as fast as possible.
Amir Offer is the first inside the terminal.
I couldn't see my commander, and I was sure that he already ran and he disappeared in the darkness, and I must run as fast as I can in order to catch up with him and to cover his back.
He is on his own, with no cover.
Someone was shooting in the terminal about 5 meters inside it, and he was holding an AK-47, and he was shooting at me directly. You know, I could see his hands like this because he was shooting a huge burst of fire.
His Special Forces training kicks into action.
The bullets were one here and one there, and I simply didn't care. I just shot him accurately 3 or 4 bullets, and, you know, tuck, 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 and that's it.
The rest of the team catch up. As they move through the terminal, they see 2 men dressed as civilians. They don't realize they are terrorists until one soldier notices a spark.
They shouted, they have a grenade, and they shoot them.
The assault team is now together. They continue to sweep the terminal.
There were 2 other terrorists. They turned their rifle to shoot me in the back. Within 5 seconds, I was supposed to die twice.
Next, the troops advance into the passengers' hall.
We were scanning the whole room with our eyes, looking for more terrorists.
The hostages have no idea who these soldiers are.
It was very frightening moments. It looks like hours. And we didn't understand what is going on.
In my left hand, I put the loudspeaker. My right hand was still on the trigger. And I said, everybody lie down. They were totally sure that they are now going to be executed.
In the confusion, one hostage, Jean-Jacques Maimoni, excited to be rescued, leaps to his feet.
He jumped against my explicit instruction to lie down, and he was mistakenly considered to be a terrorist who is jumping in order to run and activate a bomb or whatever, and he was shot.
I shouted to him not to move, but he didn't hear me. There was already too much noise from the shooting. Then I wanted to pull him with his foot, but there was too many bullets around. He jumped to say, "Wonderful for saving me."
Maimoni is one of the 3 hostages killed in the crossfire. The hostages start to realize what is happening.
They started to raise a little bit their heads and just, you know, to look from the bottom, from the floor, to look up. And suddenly they identified, or they understood that they're not going to be killed, that someone came to rescue them. And it's an amazing moment.
It's like if there was an angel coming out of the sky. It was such a surprise.
By now, the rest of the Israeli force has landed and is battling the Ugandan army outside. The Hercules pilots are waiting in the dark.
They were shooting all over the place, tracers, and I couldn't tell if they are aiming to us or not. One bullet at the right place, the airplane is grounded. You cannot take off.
Inside the terminal, the assault force needs to report to the unit's commander that the team has eliminated the hijackers' threat.
I call Yoni on the radio and I say, mission completed. Yoni, I say, completed. Just like in the rehearsal. Nothing. The unit's communications officer picks up. He's yelling, Yoni is hurt, Yoni is hurt.
Yoni Netanyahu, Matkal's commander, has been critically injured. There's no time to digest the news. They're still not out of danger.
The soldiers told us to go out, to follow the lights outside to the Hercules, and we started to run.
They only have minutes before the Ugandan army regroups.
Amin's reaction was furious. He regretted that he had been duped by Colonel Balev, that they were negotiating with a view to peaceful exchanges. Yet the Israelis had been having double planning. That kind of thing, to my view, annoyed him more.
The hostages and the troops are still at least 8 hours away from home in a hostile country.
My issue was at that time to make sure that we can get the hell out of there.
The evacuation must begin.
We had to count the soldiers 1,000,000 times just to make sure we are not leaving anyone behind. It was so critical. And when we felt everybody that was ready took off.
But not everyone is on the plane. Ilan Hartouv's elderly mother was taken to a Ugandan hospital the night before.
I said I had a mother who was in hospital 30 miles away, of course, 30 kilometers away. Of course, I knew they couldn't get there. There was no time for them to go and save her. But I told them to try to speak with whoever they can. And the people in the plane told me that Africans usually are very respectful to old women.
The Israeli force needs to make sure they can't be pursued by the Ugandan army. A demolition team moves in to destroy the entire fleet of MiG fighter planes. On the way home, the troops learn that the unit's commander, Yoni Netanyahu, has died.
I went out to the back of one of the aircraft and I saw Yoni lying there. He was covered with an aluminium blanket. And I looked at it and I think about Yoni. In military operations, the price is always human life.
"2,000 miles away, the government in Jerusalem is waiting for an update.
I was at my office. It was, I think, 12 o'clock at night. That was the first time that the silence was broken. And we got a code which says that one of our commanders fall. Somehow, my heart told me it's Yoni, whom I loved very much.
While the Hercules planes are still in the air, news of the secret has leaked out.
We turn on the long-range radio and I put it on the loudspeaker so the special forces will hear. It started with a French television station that said, Israeli commando just did this operation.
After another 7 hours journey, and a week after the hijacking, the 4 planes carrying the troops, the hostages, and the dead are finally back home in Israel.
Everybody, all our friends, all of them were there.
It was unbelievable. I thought that the whole country is waiting for us in the airport. Lots and lots and lots of people.
pilots can finally relax.
When you have this kind of responsibility, you function. Adrenaline is so high, you just function and you don't know how. I totally collapsed when I got home.
But Matkal, the secret Black Ops unit, cannot take part in the celebrations. For many years to come, its missions and the operators who carry them out will remain in the shadows.
We were isolated and taken aside because it was top secret at the time. I think that there was one moment later on that I understood that we did something, I would say, extraordinary.
Amin took his revenge on Dora Bloch, the elderly hostage who was taken earlier to the hospital.
After the operation ended, kind of a retaliation, Idi Amin gave an order to the doctors at the hospital to kill her. And that's what took place.
We waited 3 years until we heard that the remains body was there, found there, and she was brought to Israel to be buried in Israel.
They know this is a sacred mission. They felt that only they can do it, only they have to do it, only they have to take the risk.
It was not God that worked overtime. It was just we did a good job like we were expected to do.
The daring raid and the courage of the troops who carried it out would be studied by forces all around the world and serve as a model for what special ops teams could achieve. The Israelis' overwhelming retaliation to the hijackers is an early international victory in the war on terrorism. Ruthless communist terrorists are targeting innocent civilians. Murder and mayhem sweep the nation. An insane rebel leader known for slaughtering babies in the womb kills and plunders before disappearing into jungle swamps. This is a job for Britain's SAS, but they will need to train hard, develop new tactics and techniques, and penetrate deep into the most inhospitable terrain on Earth, the Malayan jungle. Using all their training and superhuman feats of endurance, can they corner and capture their prey? Malaya, the heart of Southeast Asia, and for centuries the wealthiest colony in the British Empire. Stretching from Thailand down to Singapore, Malaya is the world's largest producer of tin and rubber.
Malaya is the jewel of the British colonial crown. It's a cash cow. It's not something that London was keen to lose.
But after years of colonial rule, the people of Malaya want independence.
Through the spring of 1948, you got a bunch of terrorist attacks on rubber plantations. The British authorities eventually twigged that they were facing a potentially potent threat from the Malayan Communist Party.
They killed 5 people in one day, including 3 European plantation managers, and this caused the British to declare a state of emergency.
The person leading this rebellious uprising is Chin Peng, a charismatic young idealist trained by the British in the art of jungle warfare. Fighting for an independent communist state, he is backed by China and enjoys widespread support from the Malayan people.
Chin Peng was a formidable opponent. Let's not forget that he had the best training from some of the best people in Southeast Asia, he and his men. He knew his people. They had a high level of jungle skills.
Chin Peng's army of CTs, or communist terrorists, hit the British where it hurts, in their pockets, targeting rubber plantations and tin mines.
They were targeting the planters, literally just a murder campaign, assassination campaign to get rid of them.
Most of the people with what becomes called the Malayan National Liberation Army believe they're fighting for independence or to accelerate independence.
In autumn, the British hit crisis point. Sir Henry Gurney, a distinguished diplomat and now British High Commissioner for Malaya, is travelling to a meeting outside the capital, Kuala Lumpur. But the terrorists are waiting. Britain's most senior official in the colony has been murdered.
When Gurney is assassinated, that redoubles the determination in London to get something done.
But what can the British do? The communist terrorists have a huge ally, the immense Malayan jungle.
Once these insurgents had retreated to the jungle and pushed out of the settlements, you've got a big problem. Because you have an ocean of trees and jungle, and locating those people, those fish as it were, in that ocean is extremely difficult.
Running all the way down the peninsula from the border with Thailand to Singapore, it includes the oldest rainforest on Earth and is hot, humid, and virtually impenetrable.
It's such a formidable sight, you can't see anything. It's wet, it's dank, it's full of nasties, insects, snakes, trees which have big thorns on them, which we sort of nickname bastard trees. Yeah, it's just a formidable place to operate in.
This is the perfect terrain for Chin Peng's rebels.
What the British were facing then was terrorism, guerrilla warfare and large unit operations across the country. You're facing the prospect of very difficult terrain over thousands of square miles, and you've got a very limited manpower.
Many of the communists had fought the Japanese during the Second World War. Experts in jungle warfare, they know the terrain inside out and are well prepared with extensive food and ammunition dumps. They are also aided and abetted by villagers and tribesmen. They aren't communists, but they support Chin Peng as a means of gaining independence.
Initially, the insurgents are very closely linked with the villagers on the forest frontier. There's this very close symbiotic relationship and a lot of genuine support. These people are wartime heroes to many people.
from their remote jungle bases, Peng's men launch a series of lightning attacks before melting away without a trace.
They started to stress slightly smaller scale actions, not more than ever 100 men, often just 10, 15. Attacking a plantation to try and burn it. It's to create economic sabotage. Ambushing convoys or police stations to get weapons.
In the face of growing public support, the colonial government need a plan to fight this insurgency. They come up with a two-pronged attack. First, they need to separate the terrorists from their supporters. They force whole communities to move across the country and away from areas of communist influence.
500,000 Chinese are resettled into villages, about 10% of the population of Malaya, within 18 months.
Second, they need a fighting force capable of taking the fight to the enemy, deep in the Malayan jungle. Britain looks to one of her most experienced jungle fighters for answers. Lieutenant Colonel Mad Mike Calvert. Calvert made his name in the legendary Chindits, a specialist force that pioneered long-range jungle penetration during World War II.
Calvert was highly regarded, even in the War Office, amongst the traditionalists.
The Chindits were the first force to take the fight to the Japanese and win.
He'd written a pamphlet on behind-the-lines operations then, which was widely circulated amongst the army. He was a jungle fighter extraordinaire, if a little unorthodox.
He ended the war as a commander in special forces. As Britain's #1 jungle expert, Calvert gets the call to come out to Malaya and find a solution.
He had an analytical mind, so there was nobody better qualified to understand Special Forces operations and to actually get to grip with the jungle environment.
His first task is to recruit men. Operating outside the official channels, he collects an unruly mob of colonial misfits. He then bonds them together using highly unorthodox methods.
He decided that the best way to make them gel, develop camaraderie, was to have a few beers, and not only do that on a regular basis, but to excess.
Bizarrely, Calvert sees this as part of the selection process. If they can handle the booze, they can handle anything.
He figured that in the jungle environment, you're bound to be susceptible to all sorts of diseases, malaria, venomous insects. So if you can operate completely hammered, then he figured that whatever's inflicted on you in the jungle, then you'll be able to cope with that.
Calvert would often turn up himself drunk on parade, testing his men by punching them in the stomach. If any fell over, they would instantly be kicked out.
Come on, come on!
For those that made it past these basic selection tests, he created his own unique style of training. First up, mastering those cornerstones of jungle warfare: concealment and stealth.
He would have people going around with pairs of goggles and air pistols, and as concealment exercises, they would be shooting each other.
The aim is to hide and then stealthily creep up and shoot your opponent.
You know, you're soon going to learn, if you're getting shot with pellets in the face, that how to conceal yourself a little better.
And if pellets weren't painful enough, the message was driven home with live grenades. One of Calvert's biggest challenges is to get the military to think differently about jungle warfare. Conventional thinking in the 1950s is that you can only last a few days.
The medical consensus was at the time that you couldn't extend the operations of the soldiers on the ground in the jungle because of the environment beyond 10 days.
Because of this, the conventional military approach to jungle fighting is to use large units sweeping through the jungle for short periods. But this process is noisy and ineffective because it tips the enemy off. Calvert now draws on his own experience in the Chindits. His approach is the exact opposite, to use small patrols for long periods.
Calvert's premise for having very small units of 2 to 3 men was that in particularly dense jungle, where there aren't wide open trails, if you're actually going to move through the jungle, you need to make as little noise as possible. You need to be well concealed. So if you've got a minimal number of people but with a maximum amount of firepower, then you're going to be effective.
But how do you maximize a patrol's time in the jungle when it can take weeks just to march to an objective? Calvert pioneers a radical but dangerous solution: parachuting into the jungle.
Normally what happened was that the parachute canopy would get caught in the tree canopy.
This could leave soldiers dangling helplessly hundreds of feet from the ground.
Once they were dangling from the forest canopy, they could detach themselves from their parachute harness and use ropes to shimmy down to the jungle floor. So they actually developed tree jumping as a special technique, which was a total innovation, of course.
These airborne drops, known as tree jumping, often lead to horrific injuries.
Tree jumping, parachutist nightmare. It's inherent with danger. The whole thing's ludicrous, nightmare, madness even. Some you're going to land in 100 feet canopy. Some may be lucky and get snagged up at 50 feet. You could be very unlucky and get snagged up with a broken neck or leg.
Those that didn't break their limbs need to learn how to survive. Calvert's approach was to establish bases in the heart of the jungle, which can be resupplied by air, enabling the men to spend months on the ground.
There would be parachute drops, and later, at the end of 1951, Calvert again adopted the Chindit experience of using helicopters, which was very much experimental.
Using these camps as bases, small units can dominate large areas of jungle by repeatedly patrolling them, so preventing the terrorists from establishing bases. But getting into the jungle is the easy bit. The men now need to learn how to survive and operate in this environment.
It is the most hostile environment on Earth to fight a campaign of war in. That's why the SES trained there.
It's dark, and there are creepy crawlies, and there are animals that maybe you can't see.
It heightens all your skills, your soldiering skills, your smell, sight, your taste.
There are snakes, there are things that can sting you, and of course there were giant leeches, particularly in the swamps, which could suck a pint of blood at a time, you know?
All these things are a major factor when you're a combat troop on the ground.
A further complication in the hunt for communist terrorists. is that there are no proper maps. What they have are often crude aerial photos. In some cases, white patches labeled clouds blank out miles of terrain.
Navigation was very difficult in the jungle. You couldn't move in straight lines. You had to develop intuition. You know, it was something, you know, you couldn't just learn from a compass and a map.
Knowing that the terrorists only survive deep in the jungle by depending on local tribes, Calvert's next innovation is to encourage his men to befriend the tribespeople and learn from them.
Local knowledge is extremely important. That's how the SES made their name, basically. Hearts and minds.
If you can win them over to your side, then you have the advantage of eyes and ears, as it were, and also the resources they can supply you in terms of things like food, if needs be.
The tactic of winning hearts and minds has been widely adopted by special forces ever since, and is now recognized as a vital element when planning an operation. Operating in small numbers, Calvert's troops learn to move quickly and quietly through the jungle.
They started to understand that you moved through the jungle silently. You took your time. You know, you didn't rush it.
They also become highly skilled trackers.
Anyone who moves and lives in the jungle leaves some kind of sign, as they called it. And some of them became real experts, some legendary, even when I was in the regiment.
Learning their way around the jungle, they are now as good as their communist enemy, developing skills and instincts that come from living close to nature.
They started to develop, you know, a feeling for the jungle, that it wasn't this alien, hostile environment that they were separate from. They started to feel they were actually part of it.
Above all, it was here, in the jungle, that they would learn the most critical of skills that has now become a hallmark of the SAS.
They developed this tremendous sense of patience, you know, because they felt at ease now in the jungle. They could wait for 60 days, you know, and lay that ambush for 60 days, waiting for the enemy to come along. And that was quite remarkable, really.
By 1952, Calvert's scouts are in good shape. All his training is starting to work.
They started developing this esprit de corps. They started feeling proud of being in this elite unit. They'd started to get battle discipline.
It is now that the Malayan scouts are allowed to adopt the name of the most famous regiment of them all, the Special Air Service, or SAS.
Malaya was the most successful, I mean, it was the original and the most successful counterinsurgency campaign that Britain was ever involved in.
The SAS enjoys increasing success in deep strike, search and destroy jungle missions.
The SAS made 108 kills, but those kills were high quality. You know, they were CT leaders. They actually disrupted the CT's campaign by A, attacking their lines of communication, and B, making sure that the jungle was no longer the safe refuge it had been to start off with.
By 1954, across Malaya, the twofold plan of population resettlement and deep penetration jungle ops is paying off.
As early as 1955, the insurgents realise there's no obvious way of them increasing the insurgency again. They appear to be declining year on year. They're in trouble. And that's the year they come out and try and negotiate a peace.
But it comes too late. Britain pulls the rug from under the terrorists by giving the Malayan people what they want: independence. But independence isn't enough for Chin Peng. He now reveals himself for what he really is. Not a freedom fighter, but an extremist, fighting for a Chinese-backed communist state.
Chin Peng's forces remained a thorn in the side of the government. They remained a threat. As long as they were existing there in physical form, as human beings in the jungle, they were a threat.
One such threat is Chin Peng's henchman, Ah Hoi.
We know he may have been an important leader in groups of up to 50 strong, and that he rose to being a member on the State Committee, which means there was a $20,000 reward on his head.
Ah Hoi has a fearsome reputation. Nicknamed the Baby Killer, he once terrified villagers into supporting him by cutting the unborn fetus from the pregnant wife of an informer. Operating from the large coastal swamps of Telok Anson, just 50 miles north of Kuala Lumpur, his control over the rich rice-producing regions means he has ready access to food and can keep fighting. Maintaining the fiction that Malaya is still in British hands, he continues his hit-and-run campaign of terror against colonial rubber plantations. He needs to be stopped. This is a job for the SAS. But with Mike Calvert posted back to British forces in Germany, the job of flushing Ah Hoi out of the swamps falls to SAS Major Harry Thompson.
Major Harry Thompson was a Scotsman and a very flamboyant character, known for his sort of, showman-like approach.
The mission is codenamed Operation Sweep. Its task, take out Ah Hoi and any other CTs operating in that area.
British policy is to target the committee members of the Communist Party, who are the brains, the operating part of the mechanism. Their idea is it's no good just killing more and more men as part of a policy of attrition. You have to remove the leaders.
Planning the op is a formidable task. Thompson's first problem is finding Ah Hoi. Intelligence reveals his gang are well protected, entrenched deep within a formidable swamp that backs onto dense jungle. This presents Thompson with a complex challenge.
Anybody who's done any military training or any activity in the jungle knows that your horizon can be measured in terms less of meters than centimeters. It's extremely difficult to work in that environment, and that's at the best of times.
It is estimated that it takes over 6,500 hours of patrolling to even spot an insurgent, let alone kill one. Thompson believes the best way to corner Ah Hoi is the SAS way, using small units, stealth, and surprise. The key is to get close to him before he realizes they're even there. Critically, only the SAS have the experience and expertise in a specialist method of insertion, tree jumping.
The advantage of parachuting, of course, was that you could get there very quickly and you could drop very quickly into the forest. The drop was only 45 seconds, so you're not in the air for very long. So it's unlikely people will see you.
Another advantage of tree jumping is that it will also enable the SAS to catch Ah Hoi by surprise. By approaching from his blind side, the jungle, they're also cutting off his escape route.
The guerrillas would have expected them to come from the coast. Instead, they came from inland, from the headwaters of the river, moving downstream.
This will force the terrorists to move towards the coast, where there will be nowhere to hide.
This was all about being unconventional and, you know, approaching the enemy in a way that was completely unexpected.
Thompson has a trick up his sleeve. Access to a new piece of technology that he believes will make parachute insertions more successful. The Blackburn Beverly. Introduced in 1955 and by chance in Malaya on a promotional tour, the Blackburn Beverly is a cargo plane and has never been used for parachuting. Until now, jumps were done through the side door, one at a time. As a result, the troop could be strung out in a chain, often overshooting the drop by miles.
The Blackburn had a ramp. So the ideal thing about that was you could dispatch 2 sticks off the back of the ramp in half-second intervals. So you could get more men in the air at half the time. Yeah, it was excellent piece of kit to use.
On a winter's morning, 70 men of B Squadron SAS prepare to board 2 planes. Commanding one troop is a young 24-year-old, Peter de la Billière. DLB, as he became known, goes on to become one of Britain's 20th century military greats.
Peter de la Billière was a captain at that time. He was a troop commander in D Squadron.
Leading one of the other troops is Harry, the bosun, Sandilands.
Bosun Sandilands. He was a sergeant, of course, not an officer, and he'd had a lot of experience in Malaya. He was an expert tracker. He was a man who was, you know, fitted very well in the jungle environment.
It is a short half-hour flight to the drop zone. Thompson hits on an idea to maintain the element of surprise.
The aeroplanes could be heard from a long way off. So what they did was, as soon as they took off from base, they went straight into the parachute dropping speed.
By slowing to dropping speed, the sound of the engine will remain constant. This is designed to fool any listening terrorists.
They wouldn't have to change gear, as it was. They came into the drop zone. So anybody listening or watching would think they were just on a regular flight.
Hoping this tactic will pay off, the SAS approach the drop zone.
With about 5 minutes approaching the DZ, you get told to stand up. You check, and double check. Then the red light goes on. And when the red light goes on, that tells you normally about 30 seconds or a minute to the drop zone.
After just 30 minutes in the air, it is time to deploy.
When the green light comes on, you know you're off, and then suddenly you get dispatched.
But jumping into trees is always risky. Straight away, their problems begin.
There was one serious casualty, Trooper Mukahi. He unfortunately fell on a mangrove root. His back was just snapped like a twig, and he also had broken ribs. And of course, this was a casualty that couldn't be fixed in situ.
Thank you. No!
Mulcahy needs immediate medical attention, but to get him to a hospital from this remote location requires a casualty evacuation by helicopter.
Now, of course, there was no landing zone for the helicopter, so that meant that they had to chop a landing zone out of the jungle, which would take time. It was very hard work, and of course, it would attract the attention of any guerrillas who happened to be in the area.
In his command post, Major Thompson and his officers are tuned into the patrol's frequency, awaiting news. When a request for an evacuation comes in, they know that the whole mission may be compromised. But they have no choice. They'll have to send in a helicopter.
They must have felt that the operation had been blown at that stage, and yet, you know, being the SAS, they decided to continue.
With Trooper Mulcahy on board, the helicopter departs. Although fearing the mission is blown, de la Billière and Sandilands gather their men, check their weapons, and head off into the unknown. Once again, the SAS find themselves up against a fearsome enemy, the jungle.
It's nothing like the jungles you see in the movies. It's nothing like sort of the Daktari type movies or I'm a celebrity, get me out of here type thing. It's impenetrable, it's thick. Everything you touch is wet.
The conditions are atrocious. They slosh through leech-infested water, at times up to their necks. The rain pelts down incessantly, dripping from tall trees, and mosquitoes attack continuously.
It is exhausting for soldiers. They develop this sense of patience in which, you know, they just slow themselves down to the rhythm of nature, which is what you need to do if you're going to adapt to that environment.
Well, in the jungle, you've got to move very slowly. I remember walking 100 meters in 8 hours once. That shows you how grueling it can be. And that is tactical formation, weapons at hand, point man safe to catch you off.
In such dense jungle, the role of the point man is crucial. It takes time to raise and aim the powerful but cumbersome automatic rifles. So the man leading the patrol carries a lighter weapon.
The other innovation was that they carried shotguns, pump-action shotguns with 9-ball ammunition, which actually spread out, you know, when they fired it. You'd see the enemy, maybe just a flash of khaki in the bushes, and boom, you know, and you'd be almost certain to get it. The 9-ball ammunition was absolutely devastating. It would cut the flesh off people's bones.
To maximize their chances of finding Ahoy, the force splits up. 2 troops, one led by de la Billière and the other by Sandilands, head off separately into the jungle and begin their hunt for the enemy. Day after day, both patrols press on, feeling their way through the jungle.
When you're patrolling in the jungle, you keep off tracks. Obviously, man-made or animal-made. You keep off tracks. Any known features, you keep off ridge lines. You keep away from river streams, river beds. So you have to zigzag across the country, and you have to cover your tracks as you go.
Captain Peter de la Billière's troop wade through the swamp water for 3 days.
Your equipment starts to disintegrate, starts to go moldy. I mean, that actually develops mold. And, you know, your clothing starts to fall to pieces. Your boots start to fall to pieces.
No socks. The point is wearing socks in the jungle. One would have thought without socks, your feet would have been rubbed raw. But they do get rubbed raw a bit, but then the body develops the scabs and then you get the rough skin. So the tops of your feet are actually the same as the soles, you know, by the time you come out of the jungle.
Even for the SAS, these conditions proved too difficult. They realized no one, not even the guerrillas, could endure these conditions, and so move on to drier ground along the riverbank. all the time concentrating on their tracking skills.
It was in Malaya that the SS first developed this very methodical approach to patrolling. That, you know, you take your time, you do everything carefully, nothing is rushed, everything is important, nothing is missed. You might follow the enemy, follow their sign for day after day after day, you know, for mile after mile after mile, with absolute patience until you know, make contact with them.
During the second week of the mission, their patience and training pays off. They come across remains of a recently abandoned camp, marked by piles of shells from turtles someone had cooked and eaten. This could be the first sign that they're closing in on Ahoy and his murderous gang. News of the abandoned camp is relayed to Thompson.
Yeah, the coordinate.
Thompson's convinced the terrorists left after hearing the helicopter evacuation. He believes they're making a run for it. He decides to try and cut them off 10 miles further downstream. In this environment, regular radio contact is vital.
It's really only in the Malaya campaign that, you know, communications, or signals as it's called in the army, comes into its own. And they came to realize it was of crucial importance in the jungle, especially because you've got this huge area where nobody can see each other, nobody really knows what's going on.
Without radio communications, it would be impossible for Thompson to coordinate an orderly plan of attack. He radios Sandilands, giving him map references and a position to head to cut off Ahoy.
You go what they call hard routine. You always got your weapon with you and it's always loaded. There's always one up the spout. You know exactly where your ammunition is. You know where you're going. Everyone knows in the patrol where they are at any one particular time.
Believing they have the terrorists on the run, the SAS think it's just a matter of finding them.
Whenever a man moves through the jungle, he always leaves sign. There's always something. You know, it might be a disturbed bush, a bush which has been cut, it might be insects which have been disturbed, you know, something really tiny that you'd really have to look out for.
Sandilands patrol cautiously advances on the grid reference given to him by Thompson.
You're like a machine slowly going through the jungle. I mean, you can't have a laugh and a joke. There's no talking. You whisper in the jungle, you do hand signals, and all your hand signals are very slow and precise because sign, noise, gives you away, gives your position away.
Then, a piece of luck. They come across a local tribesman, and thanks to their hearts and minds training, he gives them some vital intelligence. He has seen a couple of Ahoy's men a few miles downstream. They can now be certain that they're closing in on the enemy. They start to employ those critical SAS skills, stealth and silence.
When you're going into battle, basically, going into the jungle, going to do a CTR, close target recce on the enemy camp, or whether you're going to close with the enemy, that is where it becomes very, very difficult. Special skills then come out of men. I mean, that is why the SAS are probably one of the best jungle fighters in the world.
Creeping up to the location, they spot the terrorists on the other side of a stream.
They got within about 50 yards of the communists and they opened fire.
One of Ahoy's gang flees into the jungle. leaving the other dead. Sandilands sets off in pursuit.
They actually managed to follow the tracks of the one who'd run off for about 5 miles until they found his camp.
But when Sandilands gets there, the camp is abandoned. But it does give up valuable intelligence.
They did establish definitely that there were CTs still in that area, and that gave a great probability that Ahoy was in the area.
Convinced he can corner Ahoy, Thompson calls in reinforcements. The regular army and police throw a tight cordon around this swamp area. The net is closing in. 3 days later, there is a breakthrough.
Hands up! Keep coming forward, keep coming forward.
A known associate of Ahoy approaches a patrol saying her unit is almost out of food. Though exhausted and starving, she refuses to give away Ahoy's position.
No.
Sandilands radios the situation to Thompson.
There's nothing there.
Sir. Thompson has a problem. He knows Ahoy must be nearby, but he doesn't know where. In this swamp, it could still take weeks to flush him out. He decides to bluff. Unless they surrender now, he tells the woman, he'll bomb the camp within 48 hours, even though he doesn't know where it is. The bluff works. She heads back into the jungle to persuade Ahoy to surrender.
I think that the CTs by that time had more or less had it, and when they realized, A, that they were surrounded, they couldn't get out, B, the British were threatening to bomb them, I think that was really the end game for them. The campaign was over, and, you know, the British had won, basically.
Get your hands up! Hands up now!
The following day, the SAS take the surrender of a group of 5, including notorious CT leader Ahoy. He had disguised himself in a woman's silk jacket and straw hat. For Thompson, this is a great result.
Operation Sweep was the culmination of everything that the SAS had learned in Malaya. It was particularly hard terrain. It was mostly operating in swamps, which were the most difficult areas to operate in. And it employed parachuting in, which was an SAS thing. It employed all the techniques of patrolling, tracking and so on, you know, silent movement, all those things they'd learned in the years of the emergency.
Over the next couple of years, the remaining terrorists are defeated, either surrendering, being starved into submission, or fleeing to Thailand. The 12-year-long undeclared war was over. This marked the beginnings of the glory days for the SAS. From the shaky start that was the Malayan Scouts, these men went on to overcome countless challenges, and in the process became the elite force we recognize today.
They were the inception of what's now 22 SAS. 4-man patrols, the importance of local knowledge, all this stuff now that we consider to be absolutely essential. The necessity to live off the land, to be familiar with the people amongst whom you operate. This is when these ideas came about.
For those involved in Operation Sweep, there would be varying consequences. Ahoy and Chin Peng were both deported to Thailand. Chin Peng, the mastermind behind the crisis in Malaya, died in Bangkok on the 16th of September 2013. For his role in capturing Ahoy, Bosun Sandilands was awarded the Military Medal. Peter de la Billière would go on to a glittering military career. including becoming Director of Special Forces and the Commander-in-Chief of the British Army during the 1990 Gulf War. As for the SAS, with a reputation second to none, they are experts in counter-terrorism and special operations, ready to serve at a moment's notice anywhere in the world where there is trouble. A force of elite American troops on board Black Hawk helicopters strike into the heart of the city of Mogadishu, Somalia.
We were invincible, we were Superman, and these were the Captain Kirks of Army aviation.
Their task, to abduct two sidekicks of a brutal Somali warlord.
We just came out of nowhere and dropped into the city.
This Special Forces mission is supposed to last less than an hour. But the operation spirals out of control.
We got a Black Hawk down! We got a Black Hawk down!
And then everything changed. Then it became a whole nother mission.
Thousands of Somalis surround the troops trapped inside enemy territory.
Once that Black Hawk crashed, it was immense. It was a mob.
The Americans launch a rescue mission that will push them to the limit.
The hornet's nest, so to speak, had been stirred up, and we were receiving fire at every intersection.
The battle would become the legend of Black Hawk Down. On the east coast of Africa lies the country of Somalia. Its capital city, Mogadishu. It is about to witness one of the bloodiest chapters in its history. US forces are launching a raid into a slum neighborhood near the city's Bakara market. On board the helicopters are the elite Special Forces unit, Task Force Ranger. Their mission, to capture and extract two henchmen of a suspected war criminal.
It was pretty simple. To get in, capture the targets, and to get out. If the leadership of the country said, this is what we want you guys to go do, that's what I wanted to go do.
For the young American soldiers, it's just another day at the office.
We were certainly mentally prepared for it, and we were certainly ready for whatever that they could throw at us.
We went where we wanted to go, and there wasn't anyone there that could tell us or make us do otherwise. There simply wasn't.
24 Pakistani UN.
3 miles away at the American headquarters, senior officers are directing the raid. Heading up Task Force Ranger is two-star General William Garrison.
William Garrison was an expert infantryman. He had served in the airborne. He had been an advisor in Vietnam.
Garrison has fought battles all over the world for nearly 3 decades.
General Garrison was a very much well-respected in the field of special forces.
Despite his men's confidence, Garrison is experienced enough to know this mission is full of risk. He's sending Task Force Ranger into one of the most dangerous cities in the world. But if it succeeds, he will strike a blow against one of the most ruthless men in Somalia, Mohammed Farah Aidid. Adeed hits the headlines in 1992 when he tries to seize control of a famine-ravaged Somalia. A United Nations relief force, including American troops, arrives to help feed the starving millions. But Adeed's clan attempt to control the supply of food.
Food was power. Clans would raid food convoys, take food, distribute it onto their own members. This then forced the United Nations to look at security measures.
Adeed's men massacre 24 UN peacekeepers. It makes him a wanted man. But Adeed just disappears.
General Adeed had basically gone underground. And so some of the thoughts of Task Force Ranger was, if we can't get Adeed, let's look for the lieutenants.
Garrison has intelligence that two of Adeed's most trusted associates have been spotted in Mogadishu. These are the men the Task Force Ranger have been sent in to snatch.
If you could cut off those leaders, then that would make it very tough for Adeed.
Garrison's Task Force Ranger seems perfect for this extraction mission. At its heart are the Rangers, the US Army's elite light infantry. Fighting alongside them are highly trained helicopter teams and members of the secretive Special Forces unit, Delta Force.
Delta is arguably the best in the world of special operations. So when we're engaging what we considered gangs or street-level thugs, the battle was ours to lose.
The assault force of 160 men knows exactly what's expected of them. The mission has been planned to the finest detail. It is supposed to last less than an hour.
Speed and surprise was the most important elements of any of these raids.
Delta operators will land on the target building in Little Bird helicopters, storm inside and arrest Adeed's men. At the same time, Ranger units known as Chalks will rope in from Black Hawk helicopters. Chalks 1, 2, 3, and 4 will each secure a corner of the building and form a defensive perimeter. A convoy will drive to the target building, pick up the prisoners and the assault team, and bring them back to base. The operation will be monitored live from Garrison's headquarters. Video cameras mounted on helicopters follow the men as they go into action. By mid-afternoon, the airborne assault force has maneuvered above the target building. On board, Rangers Kenny Thomas and Randy Romalia prepare to fast rope in.
Very orchestrated and very rehearsed. Kick the rope out and then everybody just starts going. And it's a very fast and very efficient way to get people out.
We just came out of nowhere and dropped into the city. And it was almost that calm before the storm.
The Rangers secure the area around the target building. Inside, the Delta team move in on Adeed's men. It's no contest.
It took Delta Force about 15 minutes or so to get everybody secured.
The raid is going like clockwork.
They brought all the guys out of the building and we were like, yes, we scored. Like we knew we had done a good thing. So that left us on the target, waiting for our ride.
With the exception of one injured private, the Special Operations mission is a massive success.
it was another Sunday drive home, that you would be able to complete the mission and let's go home now, boys.
The Americans and their prisoners begin to load up onto the convoy, but the Somalis are quickly amassing forces. Chalk 3, the Ranger unit including Kenny Thomas and Randy Romalia, are waiting near the target building. Soon, they are taking fire.
Started with one weapon being fired at you from one direction to multiple directions.
But it really wasn't that bad at that point. The reason it wasn't bad is because they were missing.
But as Kenny discovers, the Somalis are becoming more accurate.
I was on a knee firing down the road and it hit me right here. Bam, it just knocked me backwards.
And I looked over and Kenny is holding a magazine and shaking.
I thought the thing was gonna blow up or something. So I'm pulling the magazine. I looked over across the street and Randy's over there. He's like almost laughing at me because he must have looked silly to him.
And the magazine kept that round from going through and hitting him in the chest. The center mass shot on Kenny.
And there's a perfect hole in it, and then on the back side, the whole back end of it's blown out. And you're like, wow, it's a game of inches, you know?
Every second the Americans spend in the danger zone gives the Somalis time to bring in more militiamen. And they have a lethal surprise for Task Force Ranger.
I looked up and I saw the black smoke coming from the tail section of the Black Hawk, and it went into a spin.
It looked odd. Like it shouldn't be flying like that. In the back of your mind, you knew that it was going down.
Heard it impact.
We got a Black Hawk crash in the city. Black Hawk crash in the city.
We're just waiting to go home when the first helicopter got shot down, and then everything changed. Then it became a whole nother mission.
The Somalis near the crash site swarm towards the injured men of the downed helicopter.
You saw masses of people blocks away from us moving in that direction.
At his headquarters, Garrison and his team watch the disaster unfold. Among his staff is Ranger Larry Moores.
It was very busy, especially once the helicopter crashed in the city. Everybody's anxiety goes up a notch. We are very focused on how can we evacuate everybody from the city.
The two pilots are dead, but there are some survivors at the site.
Now General Garrison has to react. He has to now put in forces. This is a major concern because where the shoot-down occurred.
The situation is all the more difficult because the helicopter has crashed deep inside hostile territory.
Task Force Ranger is in an urban area that might be very difficult to get forces in and conversely get forces out.
Garrison orders another helicopter to drop medics and snipers onto the crash site. But that just buys time. He will also have to divert the convoy that's loaded up with the prisoners to pick up the survivors. But no one knows how long the convoy will take to arrive. He mobilizes the Rangers and Delta operators that are still on the ground near the target building. They follow orders to move to the crash site and form a protective cordon as soon as they can. Chalk 3, with Randy Romalia and Kenny Thomas, are just 500 yards away from the crash site.
And immediately you knew you would run to help them. That would be your immediate reaction. Go help them. You see the bird coming down, we gotta go.
But Task Force Ranger's raid has already stirred up a hornet's nest.
So you have a whole mobilized city that could potentially be used against you at the crash site.
There was a sense of urgency for sure, because you could see people moving down on the side streets heading towards the crash. So it was a foot race.
It's now their Ranger training kicks in.
Each man goes up to the wall, up to the corner, and you run across, one at a time.
It's shoot, move, communicate, put you guys in a position where they can get an effective field of fire, identify the bad guys. It was very automatic. We all knew what we needed to do.
As the American troops move close to the crash site, the fire intensifies.
I heard like a shrieking yell, and I looked over and I saw a Delta operator. His head flipped back and he just fell. It was probably the shortest, most violent thing I've ever witnessed. You remembered that we really viewed Delta as the supermen. The only thing they didn't have were capes. So to see him shot and dropped like that was very sobering.
When people start going down and you see how matter-of-fact the death is, you realize, oh, well, if I die here, I die here. But I'm not gonna let it happen to the guys around me. Man, we weren't fighting for the flag, and we weren't fighting for freedom. At this point, you're fighting for each other. That's it. And that's when I turned around and went back and I was like, hey, you guys take care of each other. We're gonna make it out of here. That's the only way we're gonna make it out of here.
Kenny and Randy's unit continue to fight their way towards the Americans at the crash site, but they're still a block away. All the while, the Somalis are gaining in confidence and numbers.
Be advised, we're coming under heavy fire.
At headquarters, General Garrison gets more bad news. The convoy that's been diverted towards the crash site has run into trouble.
Unfortunately, because of problems with direction, the convoy actually became lost within the city. Then add on people shooting at you, add on blockades of roads. It becomes a very difficult job.
Garrison realizes it will take far longer than he thought to get the convoy to the men at the crash site. He will have to use helicopters to support them for now, and this is risky. Somalis lie in wait, with rocket-propelled grenades all over the city. A half-mile away from the crash site, a second Black Hawk is targeted. Garrison and his team watch in horror as the second helicopter goes down.
We got another helicopter down. We need combat search and rescue.
When the second one went in, it just ramped up the intensity.
Again, there are survivors. One of them is the Black Hawk's pilot, Mike Durant.
Whatever it took, whatever force we needed to put together, we were going to do that and bring everybody back off of the objectives.
Another Black Hawk ropes in 2 Delta snipers to protect Durant and his crew. They are quickly surrounded. The 2 Black Hawks have crashed half a mile away from each other, making the rescue mission even harder. And the convoy is still unable to break through to the first crash site. Half its force is now either wounded or dead.
We kept hearing on the radio the amount of casualties. All I wanted to do was be out there with them and be a part of the effort.
Garrison reaches a devastating decision. The rescue convoy is becoming combat ineffective. He has no choice but to pull them out. Back at the first crash site, Kenny Thomas hears that the convoy is being hauled back to base.
I can't believe it's happening. But the reality of it is that it is happening, and now what are you going to do about it?
Most of the American troops have made it to the roads and alleys surrounding the first crashed Black Hawk. Now, they begin to form a defensive perimeter around the downed aircraft and wounded men.
It was just putting guys in the right vantage points to minimize the amount of fire we were receiving from the enemy.
Kenny and Randy's Chalk 3 take up their positions near a main road. They are surrounded by a baying mob. They have to find a way to hold them off. So they turn to the squad's M60 heavy machine gun.
We needed that M60 there. And we were going to do whatever it took to keep that M60 there.
Enemy fire strikes the M60 gunner. Kenny takes over.
There was these two guys that were just popping their heads up over a little retaining wall. Just popping up and doing the Mogadishu machine gun man, which is not even aiming, and just spraying rounds. So I got behind the gun, I waited for those guys to stick their heads up and fired off a couple rounds, like, bap, bap, bap. And then the gun goes click, click, chick, chick, chick. And I'm like, what the? It's out of rounds. Everybody's yelling at me, use the law. And I'm like, what? Because the law. And I had been carrying around this light anti-tank weapon, the law. I'm like, oh, I have a rocket launcher. So he fired it off. And that took down that position.
And that was very effective at dissuading the Somalis from coming back to that corner.
But now, there are fewer than 100 men protecting the crash site. The number of Somalis are steadily growing, and they outnumber the Americans at least 10 to 1. Most of them with close links to a Deeds clan.
The Somali clan member believes in clan first and last. They're going to take that to the nth degree, to such an extent that they're willing to die for it.
To make them even more fanatical, some are high on the local drug of choice.
There was some use of an addictive drug called cat. It's almost like being on amphetamine. It's going to provide you that extra oomph or that strength to carry on. You're fighting a tough foe.
We came in with the audacity that we could just kick in doors and take down who we wanted, and they were going to fight back. That's one of the places we went wrong. We completely underestimated their ability to play the game of urban combat.
At the American headquarters, a section of the original convoy struggles back to base. Garrison decides to send it straight back in with reinforcements. Larry Moores gets his chance to fight.
We knew we were going immediately back in, so very difficult to let them know after they'd just been shot up pretty good. Hey, we're heading right back in. There was a nervousness, but there also was a part of the way we do business in the Rangers.
The new convoy rolls out, but the Somalis are ready.
The Somalis had set up a huge roadblock. There was no maneuvering around. We were hit by a high volume of small arms fire to try and keep us from getting up there to that crash site. It was a pretty constant fight.
Larry and his men try to break through, but the whole of the city is now against them.
The hornet's nest, so to speak, had been stirred up, and we were receiving fire at every intersection. We knew that it was going to be a fight that day.
Larry's convoy is held up in the middle of the city, still short of the second crash site, and even further from the men on the ground at crash site 1. The news of the convoy's slow progress comes through to the men surrounded there.
I could hear the radio transmissions, and I remember we start looking at each other with concern, because we had never been on the ground this long, and the convoy had never received this amount of fire. That was where I really felt, I believe, discouraged.
At his base, General Garrison can see his vehicles cannot find a way through the city's streets. Eventually, he realizes he has no choice but to pull them back to base for a second time.
It must have been a most difficult decision for him, because he knew that potentially if he did nothing to save those individuals, he would have another repeat of maybe a massacre. Conversely, he had to weigh the risk of having even more casualties.
Reluctantly, the men in the convoy follow General Garrison's orders.
From my perspective, I wanted to fight into the objective, but from a leadership perspective, they're making a command and control decision. Do we really want to insert more Humvees who can't support themselves for a long fight? We just create a bigger problem.
The surrounded men at the crash sites are no nearer to being rescued. Night falls on Mogadishu. It's been just 3 hours since the mission began. Near the first crash site, Kenny and Randy defend their positions against the mob in the darkness.
They would fire randomly to try to see your muzzle flash. And then at that point, once they figured out where you were, they would try to maneuver on you.
The Somalis have a critical advantage. They know every inch of ground.
Remember, these are their neighborhoods. They're not our neighborhoods.
The Americans realize they stand no chance on the city's streets.
The thing that obviously made sense, and the Delta guys had already done this, was kick in a door, take over the house, and that's what we needed to do.
The men move inside and steel themselves for a long night ahead. By now, many of the men of Task Force Ranger are regretting not bringing an essential piece of kit into the battle.
We didn't anticipate being on the ground this long. A lot of us didn't bring night vision.
Basically, we got complacent because we were happy not to carry more gear. But we learned it's better to have and not need than to need and not have.
The Americans could have seen their enemy in near total darkness with their night vision goggles. Without them, the Somalis can close in.
The fighting along the crash site is very close combat. It's almost eye to eye, tooth to tooth.
The Americans are now fighting for their lives. At headquarters, General Garrison has already seen his operation descend into chaos. Not only are the men still trapped at the first crash site, but at the second crash site, all the men are either dead or captured. Desperate to salvage something, Garrison concentrates on the first crash site, before it's too late. The only way to get his men out is to launch another convoy. But having failed twice, Garrison begins to realize he now needs support from other United Nations troops in Somalia.
How do you get the forces out? Well, you had to rely on something else. That something else were armored vehicles to break through those blockades and to protect the convoy. Who could provide that? It would only be the UN.
Getting this multinational force together will take time. It's something that the men on the ground may not have. Back at the first crash site, the men of Chalk 3 are reaching their lowest ebb.
I was exhausted at this point, and I got against the wall and I just slid onto the floor. And it looked like the floor was wet, and it was. It was wet from blood. You could actually smell the blood in the room. Once I realized I was sitting in it, I was tired enough to where I didn't even care to move. And then I remember picturing the White House at night, just like we've all seen on the news, where it's all lit up in white light at night, beautiful. And I remember thinking, no matter what decision is made there right now, there is nothing that can be done to help us. And that was very sobering, knowing that you're part of the greatest fighting force in the world, and no matter what decision is made at the highest level of government, there is nothing that can be done to help you in that particular situation, or in time to help get you out of that situation.
The Americans are paying the price for their overconfidence before the mission. They are now lacking more than just night goggles.
So at this point in the night, it was quite clear that we were running out of stuff.
They are low on ammunition, food, water, and medical supplies. At Chalk 3's position, one of their men is bleeding to death. They desperately need more morphine and IV bags. They have to be resupplied. Garrison faces another crucial decision. He has already lost 2 Black Hawks in the city, but a helicopter drop is the only way he can resupply his men.
Doing nothing is not an option. So he takes the responsibility. I have to send a helicopter out there to drop supplies, and that's what he does.
Garrison orders the launch of another Black Hawk helicopter. The pilot will need to be guided in by the men on the ground.
You have to land those supplies in a certain area where you can get access to them. You land on the wrong place, then all you're doing is giving supplies to the Somalis.
The mission's success depends on an infrared strobe carried by the American troops. Invisible to the Somalis, this small device's signal allows the pilot to spot the landing zone using his night vision sights. At the crash site, the men prepare for the drop.
This is Super 66 calling in for radio check over. Reading you loud and clear.
The Rangers talk the helicopter in until the pilot can spot the strobe.
Okay, what's my altitude? It's 100 feet into the wind, altitude's good. Okay, that's 75 feet, and you're in a good position.
It looks like it's going to plan. Then, a hail of fire.
Taking small arms fire! Taking small arms fire!
He just had to sit there, hover, and take it. He knows that bird's getting hit, man. Ting, 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 ting. You know, and he has to sit there and take it because he knows there's guys counting on him. It's not about like, I don't know, man, it's pretty hairy. I don't want to go in there. What? Are you kidding me? That's not how it works.
The Black Hawk just manages to stay in the air and makes the drop. The Rangers receive their lifeline.
Well, the bird was hovering right over the building, so they just kicked him out, and it was, you know, much needed supplies that you could argue kept one of our guys alive. You know, he was going low on fluids. They didn't have anything else to keep his body from collapsing, and without IVs, he wouldn't have made it.
The Black Hawk struggles back to base, riddled with bullets. The men on the ground can hold out a while longer. But they need General Garrison to find them a way out. At his headquarters, Garrison has had a breakthrough. Other UN forces have agreed to let him use their tanks and armored personnel carriers in the next convoy.
The Malaysians and the Pakistanis were committed to going in with us, which we give them a lot of credit for. They didn't have any trapped personnel on that objective, but they accepted that role to go out there with us and fight all night.
This heavily armored, multinational convoy will leave from Newport and head into the city. Half of the force will steer towards the second crashed helicopter to blow it up. They want to make sure its high-tech weaponry doesn't fall into enemy hands. The rest will push north towards the surrounded men at the first crash site. The rescue convoy moves out, 8 hours after the original raid was launched. Once again, Larry Moores is going in.
Anybody that was able to go out and fight that night, we took with us. So there was some intel analysts. There was a couple of wounded Rangers who were able to take a cast off their arm because they wanted to be part of the mission.
Corporal Robert Lawhead, a Humvee driver assigned to the 10th Mountain Division, joins the rescue effort.
It didn't matter if it were Special Operations, Rangers, or even the 10th Mountain Division. It was just, we had people in trouble. And at that point, we knew it was us against the country. We didn't have time to think about it. We just did it.
The convoy battles towards the surrounded men. Again, the Somalis are ready.
It was a major firefight from block to block.
They were running out in the street, taking pot shots at us. You could look up on a roof or into a window and see them shooting. You could see guys get shot right in front of you. It was chaos.
This multinational force has never trained together, and the result is confusion.
As people start driving toward the crash site, the first two Malaysian armored vehicles get hit by RPGs.
Under heavy fire, the Malaysians head off in the wrong direction, causing more delay. At the first crash site, the waiting troops are feeling the strain.
There was no mistaking where that convoy was because the exchange of gunfire was unbelievable.
The rescue operation is less than half a mile away, but it may as well be on the other side of Africa.
And the radio is like, they're en route. They're not en route. They're en route. They're not en route. You know, at some point you just gave up.
The convoy battles through the night for nearly 3 hours.
If you can imagine people on the rooftops and in the alleyways and every door shooting at you, that's what they were trying to get through.
Finally, it breaks through.
I believe at that point we thought it was pretty much over.
And we were all very tired. And you kind of get the sense, okay, well, this thing's finally done. We can get our wounded guys out of here.
The men at the crash site load up their casualties and prepare to head off. Everybody thinks they're about to go home. But General Garrison has one final challenge for them. The Ranger Creed dictates the Americans can't leave a man behind. He wants his men to bring the body of the pilot of the crashed helicopter home.
This was something we had to do. It was the right thing. It was not a question that we were going to leave the body behind.
But the body is still trapped inside the crushed cockpit, and it will take time to free it. The delay could mean they lose the cover of darkness.
It became a fight against time, dismantling that aircraft to remove him, to bring him home with us.
Robert Lawhead's Humvee is called into action to try and free the body from the wreckage.
We would start attaching the tow strap to parts of the helicopter to try to pull, different parts of the frame apart so we could get more free access to the body.
The delay gives the Somalis more time to attack. In the house, Randy and Kenny's nerves are becoming shredded.
Why is it not happening? That's what you want to know. Let's get it done. Ricky Tick, come on. We were all very antsy, yeah, and the bad guys are starting to shoot again.
It was definitely the longest night in my life.
After 3.5 hours, the rescue team finally recovers the dead pilot's body. Only then can they head home.
We're getting the hell out of here. I don't care what's in front of us.
The convoy now has to fight through a heavily defended maze of streets towards a UN-held stadium in the north of the city. Worse, there's not enough vehicles for all the troops.
At that point, the plan was to run out next to vehicles.
Randy Romalia and Kenny Thomas now have to run a gauntlet of enemy fire. And they try to use the vehicles as cover.
It was a pretty intense fight still that morning.
It sounded like someone had picked up a handful of pebbles and were throwing it against sheet metal. That tink, 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 which was bullets bouncing off vehicles.
But soon the men on foot are left behind.
We got to the first intersection, and that vehicle didn't stop for us. It kept going.
And I'm a pretty fast guy, but I'm not that fast. They put the pedal down, man, took off. And that left about 30 of us ran from that city.
With their cover gone, Kenny and Randy suddenly find themselves more exposed to enemy fire.
It felt like somebody had walked up and struck me.
Looked like someone hit him with a baseball bat on the shoulder, like he just kind of did this thing.
So once I realized I had been shot, I reached into my body armor to check for an exit wound. And I started breathing in and out deeply, expecting to hear a gurgling. Lungs were still intact, I could still move, I could still breathe, which was of relief. But I knew that I was okay enough to keep moving forward.
Eventually, Kenny and Randy managed to scramble on board UN vehicles. Half an hour later, the convoy finally forces its way back to the safety of the UN-held stadium. Task Force Rangers' 14-hour ordeal is over.
As our task force came back together, it was a very emotional sight.
You know, when you look at each other, you don't have to say anything, because you know you gave it everything you could.
That was the first time I felt safe. But the reality of what had just taken place was starting to set in.
And the emotion just comes out of you. And I remember I started tearing up. And Randy walked up to me and he was asking me if I was okay. Like, he was worried about me, and he was the guy with a hole in his back. But at that time, it was enough to know he was alive, because I knew by then, you know, we had lost guys. And I knew it was a big deal.
General Garrison now counts the cost of the mission. 18 Americans, 1 Malaysian peacekeeper, and 500 Somalis are dead. Worse still, the bodies of the crew from the second crash site are mutilated and dragged through the streets in front of video cameras. Garrison would later write to President Clinton, saying full responsibility rested with him and not in Washington. The situation gets worse. The Somalis broadcast images of the captured helicopter pilot, Michael Durant.
Michael Durant was held captive.
11 days after the raid, he is released. But the humiliation causes outrage in the US. In March 1994, US troops withdraw from Somalia. A year later, the UN also pulls out. In the years since the Black Hawk Down mission, the men who fought in Somalia remain proud of what they achieved. Adid's 2 sidekicks were both captured alive.
We were there to accomplish a mission, and we did accomplish the mission. Yeah, we got our nose bloodied in the fight, but we won the fight.
The men of Task Force Ranger did everything they could to bring their comrades home. Their fighting spirit will ensure this operation will go down in Special Forces history.
You know that you had every opportunity to step out of the fight, but nobody did, because they were fighting for each other, because they knew if they stepped out of it, it would leave someone hanging. And you weren't gonna do that to your Ranger buddies. You weren't gonna do it to anybody. And that feeling sticks with you for life.
Thank you to Conflict of Nations World War III for sponsoring this video. Remember, you can play right now for free, but if you download from our link in the description within the next 30 days, you can claim your free gift of 13,000 gold as well as 1 month premium subscription. The War Room is waiting. See if you have what it takes to lead your country to victory.